Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku became Dark Knight with Harem, Part 2. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is MHA Reacts to the Batman by Dragon Godeyes 113. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. The heroes were sitting around their meeting table, looking at the pieces of Batman's armor that were left at the hospital. It pained them, to say the least. Not only had Batman done a good portion of their work for them, but when he was injured, he had gotten away without them giving a single sign of thanks or even getting to question the now dubbed Dark Knight from the Gotham media channels. All the hero students looked down as it was true, as Izuku had done a large portion of the work for them and even got injured due to this. Each of them had watched the video of the chapel incident and saw how the news had put up the image of Batman perched on the tower, looking like a mystical guardian of the city. You do have to admit he does look like a mystical guardian when he is standing like that, Snipe said as All Might smiled proudly at this and nodded in full agreement, as did many others. They also saw how the people reacted to seeing Batman in all his glory for the first time. The mystified looks and chatter about how brave or incredible he was could be heard throughout the city. Well, it looks like they are more interested in Izu than you guys, May said with mild amusement as many gave her slightly annoyed looks, but couldn't deny what she said. In short, the group currently sitting at the meeting was a little embarrassed. They didn't help or do anything, and now felt like they weren't doing their job properly. Kendo was one. She was the leader and one in charge, and yet she wasn't doing the best job of going about it and instead was doing okay, at the very least. This is why this is an exam, Kendo, to see what you should do and change to do better for when you leave UA and become a pro hero, Vlad explained to his student, making her and many feel much better. She couldn't help the sigh leaving her lips as she mulled it over, but after a few moments, she realized she couldn't dwell on it long due to the seriousness of the situation. She turned to Shinos and his partner, Kiyori. Noting how tired they both seemed to be, not only from the earlier incident but also from how they had to deal with the situation the night before with the mayor's death, she couldn't blame them for being tired after dealing with all of that in 2 days. Kendo herself felt drained. She had many responsibilities as the leader of the hero group, and even with Momo and Ida to help, there was still a lot to do. But they didn't have time to dwell on the past mistakes or how they currently felt. She needed to address the elephant in the room. Shinso. Any word or sightings of the Batman or the Riddler? The detective shook his head. Not at all. It's like he just up and disappeared the second he entered that smoke. Sorta think Lizardy is right about him being able to teleport, and on the Riddler we got nothing, not even a person matching his description while masked. Unfortunately, that is how intelligent villains operate. Those that have a decent amount of brain cells rarely allow their face or at least all of their face to be seen unless they are part of an organization like the Yakuza, for an example. Nezu explained to them as they nodded in thanks to their principal. Upon hearing this, Kendo rested her chin in her palm and spoke after thinking over her words. We need to secure Penguin as planned. Once that's done, we target Riddle. Good plan. Getting rid of a possible ally to the main villain is always a good idea when you go after them, Midnight said in approval of the plan as Kendo smiled at the pro hero. Snorting, the small form of Mineta restored. And how exactly are we going to do that? But it seems like every time we plan something, it's gone wrong or something else drags us away from it. Mina frowned at this. I hate that Mineta is right and has a point, she spoke as the other girls nodded in agreement, making the said purple bald guy sulk in the corner. No one could deny the short teen's words, but Kendo responded, as much as it pains me to say this, you're right. Things haven't gone our way, but when have they ever? The training camp? The USJ? Hell, even the provisional license exam was against us, so why start complaining and second-guessing ourselves now? She sat up straight and looked over the group with a serious, no-nonsense tone in her voice. We've gone through adversity before, we've been pushed against the wall over and over, but have we ever given up? No, we have, and it sure as hell won't start now. Her words lifted the spirits of her classmates, even though Ibarra glared at the word, hell, being us. She too was inspired. Her glare shifted into a smile at her leader and friend. That was a very good speech, Kendo, Siro said, smiling at his future leader as she smiled back at him. She's right, we can't give up. We need to work together and push through this to win the exam, spoke Shoto Todoroki. The next to speak was Kyoka Jiro as she turned to their leader. So what's the plan then, boss lady? A few slightly chucked at what Jiro called her. Kendo smiled and explained, I want a couple of you to be in the club already before we raid. You'll be our inside intelligence telling us where the guards are and supporting the breaching team when they begin the raid. The others nodded along to this, and Kendo then quickly spoke the names of those to be in the club. I want Red Riot, Earphone Jack, Emily, and Tsukuyomi to be in the club. The rest will be in 2 teams to attack the front and back of the club. Bakugo will be leading the front team with Shinso taking control of the police on that side. That is very good, as they are very good front fighters, especially Red Riot and Bakugo. Cementos spoke in approval as she smiled. The blonde bomber smiled at hearing this and gave Kirishima a fist bump. Kendo waiting for the group to come to terms with this, she continued where she was. The students of Class 1A playfully gasped. Bakubabe smiled. Is the world ending? Mina asked playfully as Bakugo glared at his glass with small explosions coming from his hands. The backbreaching team will be led by Todoroki, and the police of that group will be led by Kiori, and finally, the rest will be placed around the city and area to make sure someone can be out and about if there's another incident somewhere else. Finished Kendo. Her eyes watched as those chosen nodded and accepted their roles. Kendo also addressed the 2 leaders of the groups. Bakugo, Todoroki, you 2 will take others, will you? These will be your backup for the raid, so pick wisely, I leave that to your discretion. The 2 huffed or nodded respectively, Bakugo picking Mina while Shoto picked Taiyu for their backups. Pretty solid picks if Kendo was being honest. Good job, they can be very good support heroes, Mina with her acid and Suyu with her frog-like body due to her quirk, Snipe said in agreement with Bakugo's and Todoroki's decision. With that said, however, a phone rang, getting everyone's attention. They all turned to the source to see Shinso with a quirked eyebrow as he stared at his phone. Is it the police department, Shinso? Asked Kendo. Shinso, however, shook his head. No, and I don't recognize the number, contact name, however. A few people raised their eyebrows in interest in who was calling the lead police officer for the exam. At hearing that the others became confused, the Purplette's partner leaned into him, her chest touching his arm as she spoke up. What do you mean, Shinso-kun? The insomniac turned away, huffing with a blush at his partner getting into his personal space before turning his phone around for her and the others to see, their eyes going wide at the caller's name. Kaminari, while visibly shaken, couldn't help his curiosity as he asked, why you don't think that's right? Shinso shrugged. Don't know, but if I were a betting man, I'd say it is. The object of their confusion was the name of the caller being the Batman. It seemed the Dark Knight wanted to speak with the detective, and they could only wonder what he wanted. I wonder how Izuburo got Shinso's phone number, Kirishima asked. Probably when he used his hacking device to get into his phone to send those texts with his district attorney, Melissa responded as many nodded, as it did make sense. Half an hour earlier, the alarm on the Bat computer chimed, waking up Izuku from his much-needed sleep. His body ached, but he persevered as he got up and went to the computer to stop the alarm. After doing so, he checked his bandages and saw that they were still clean and wrapped tightly. He nodded his head, seeing that he didn't need to change them just yet. He then walked to the medical supplies he had in the cave, where he took a bottle of painkillers and downed 2 pills. Once done with that, he went over to the crate with his backup suit. Chio sighed. At least he knew how to properly wrap his bandages, so she didn't have to worry more than she already was with her most visited patient. The suit itself was less armored and more of a cloth fabric with a prototype gel armor underneath for protection against blunt trauma and slashes with a sharp weapon. That wasn't all the suit had to offer, however. The cape of this suit was made of a special fiber that would keep its shape when introduced to a certain electrical pulse that his gloves would provide. In all, it was a cape he could use to glide that Izuku never got around to testing before the exam, so he ended up using his more armored suit instead. Well, I have to agree this is a good second option, as while not as armor, it gives him more mobility along with certain other things that it seems this more has that the other one didn't, like being able to glide, for example. Gran Torino said with a small nod as All Might smiled that his mentor praised his successor, which was responded with the said old man hitting All Might with his cane over his head. The case opened with a click as the latches were unlocked and the lid was cracked open to reveal the light gray suit inside. He immediately noted the less tactical and threatening appearance compared with his last suit. His hands grasped the fabric of the suit as he looked at the bat symbol on the chest. Earlier in the designing process, he wanted the suit to keep his original friendly appearance, but that changed over time to the darker and edgier suit he ended up with. Izuku discarded his clothing and suited up into his new costume, noting how light it was. Even when fully suited up made hummed at the thought of how fast he could move now without the excess from the previous suit's bulky armor. He donned his cowl last and adjusted his gloves as he stretched his limbs, which were now free to move however they pleased. Izuku also felt the breastplate underneath his symbol to stop low firearms aimed at his chest. Looking at his form in the mirror, Izuku liked what he saw. He was still intimidating, but the suit looked slightly less practical and still gave protection in key areas in case he was ever shot at. "You do have to admit he looks much better in this one," Midnight said with a smile as she didn't even hide as her eyes looked him up and down, and the other girls nodded in agreement, doing the same as her, except for Emmy and Recovery Girl. "Alfred, what time does Riddler's second riddle end?" asked the Dark Knight. The computer responded a few seconds later, "Sir, the time of the riddle's expiration is precisely 2 hours from now. Would you like me to notify the heroes of this?" Izuku thought it over before shaking his head. "No, I'll do it myself when I contact them. In the meantime, could you pull up the second riddle for me?" "Of course, sir." The riddle flashed on the screen, letting Izuku take it over again. His mind raced with ideas and theories, but he wasn't sure just why he felt something was off about it. Nezu smiled at this as many looked worried, as the pro-heroes looked at Nezu, worried about what the end game is. "Now, the second riddle is this: I inspire hope and faith. The flood washed away our sins, my body cracked and broken, it is my word again yours, but who will the people believe when the second Genesis arrives?" The Dark Knight's eyes narrowed, it all pointed to the abandoned Christian orphanage. But the last part made him pause in thought. Second Genesis sounds suspiciously like the seawall surrounding Gotham will be having something done or had something done to it already. I need more clues to figure out what's going on before I claim anything. Many nodded in agreement, especially the heroes, as from what they knew, this did seem to point to a church. He typed in the sea wall incident that destroyed a good portion of the southeast of the city in the poor district, and looked through the details of what caused it to happen, and what he found led him conclusion. The wall was cited to have cracks and needed repair, but Mayor West didn't listen and was seen with some bad people at that time, people that if the wall were to break would get thousands, if not millions, of dollars on an insurance plea to the city. His fist clenched and his eyes narrowed into a scowl. The Riddler sees himself as some sort of prophet of justice that will rid the city of the corrupt and horrific. His stories are eerily similar to my own and my story in this city. Why does it seem that everyone who is in a high position is corrupted? Momo asked. Because a lot of the time, high-ranking members of a government are corrupted, her teacher Aizawa responded immediately. Izuku stood there thinking it all over until he noticed something he hadn't before. He stumbled upon a speech that the commissioner had on the seawall, and with the district attorney was head and the commissioner missing, he could guess what was going to happen next. He checked the time to see an hour and 56 minutes until the riddle was expired. Izuku put together that the commissioner was in the orphanage, the commissioner who had previously publicly started before the wall collapsed that it was all fine and not to worry abo, Udit, and that the mayor would handle it. The riddled has that very same man in his CL, and if he or the heroes don't move fast, he'll be dead in less than 2 hours. With a turn, Izuku pressed a few buttons on his gauntlet and then pressed his earpiece. He contacted the one person he trusted at the moment to have his phone at the ready. He called Shinso. Observation room. Nezu interlaced his fingers together as he leaned forward. It seemed Izuku was catching on, but only time would tell if he would get the full picture together in time. "You've done very well so far, Midoriya, but can you figure out the last riddle in time is the real question," thought the rat god as he took a sip of his tea. Just about everyone gave suspicious looks towards the famous rat god. While the principal was in his little world, Rumi or Mirko was drooling at the muscles seen through Izuku's new suit. She wasn't alone, as Ryaku, the wild pussycats, and the 2 engineering teens did the same. "Holy shit, and I thought his last suit looked hot," commented the rabbit heroine as she gripped her armrest hard enough to bend them slightly. "Preach it, future me," the rabbit heroine nodded in agreement with her future self. Pixie Bob of the Pussycat nodded. "You can say that again," He's a whole beefcake and then some. Mandalay sighed at her friend's remark, but didn't correct her. After all, Izuku was in tights, just his different ones in a strange way. Pixie, calm down. Besides, Kota is right here, Ragdoll said, trying and failing to not look at Izuku's ass when he turned away from the Batcomputer. Blushing, the blonde-haired pussycat sheepishly waved to Kot, who looked at her with a deadpan expression on his face. The boy did the same with his aunt and the other two as they rubbed their heads. "This is why you're my third favorite aunt," Kota says, adding deathly serious. Pixie Bob gasped and asked in a hurt tone, "Who's first and second?" Kota reaped back, crossing his arms, "Auntie Manda, and then Tiger, you, and finally Ragdoll." The blonde woman dropped out of her chair and pounded her fist on the ground. "It's not fair." Mandalay beamed, but Ragdoll inquired on why she was fourth, completely ignoring her teammate. "Why am I not third then?" Kota blushed and answered, "I saw you grab Midoriya's butt before he went into the onsen one time back during the summer camp." Everyone looked at the said woman as she blushed darkly and rubbed her head sheepishly, that this was brought up. Quote. 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 And I thought I was horny. "Shut up, Pixie, this is why you don't have a man and still aren't married," shouted Ragdoll with a massive blush on her face. The said woman, just like her future self, also had a massive blush on her face. Meanwhile, with the teacher's recovery, girl sighed in relief at the good job Izuku had done with his bandages, but that didn't stop her from glaring at Toshinori, who in turn raised his hands. Chio went back to glaring at All Might as Toshinori raised his hands in surrender. "What did I do?" the blonde man inquired when he noticed her glare. Chio just continued to shoot daggers at him before answering, "You just had to choose a successor that was just as stubborn as you are, if not more so." Toshinori flinched but defended himself and Midoriya. "We're not that bad. Your student just a few hours ago refused medical aid so he could continue his heroic mission in an exam to push his limits. If you even dare say that's not bad, I will strangle you with Torino's cape." "Point taken, I'll shut up now." "Good." That was all Chio said in response. A few people chucked at the back and forth, and Chio nodded in agreement with her future self. In the Hero HQ, Shinso tapped the answer button and earned nothing but silence. The perplet looked up from his phone at the eyes of his peers, who made gestures for him to speak. He rolled his eyes at them before doing what they suggested. "Hello." Shinso couldn't suppress the sigh that came from him, and a few chuckled. A few moments later, the voice of the Batman was heard less than Detective Shinso, "I need to speak with you and the heroes as soon as possible greater than." Everyone in the room looked around, murmuring to each other. Before Kendo walked over to Shino and told him to put it on SP speaker, he did just that, and Kendo spoke to the Vigilant. "We're here, what is it you need, Batman?" The calm and steady tone of Batman's voice echoed in the room for the second time as he replied less than, "I tracked the Riddler's call and have his location, but I believe he's holding the Commissioner hostage greater than." "As much as I hate to admit it, that is not surprising at all," Iida said with a frown on his face. Kendo, along with the other, was visibly jolted at this new information. Kaminari even shook Kirishima, who was next to him, with a beaming smile at the fact that they would finish the exam soon if possible. The leader of the group responded in a joyous and hopeful voice, "B. Batman, where is the Riddler? I'll divert some cops and heroes to your given coordinate. Less than we only have approximately an hour and a half until the Riddler's second riddle expires. In other words, he'll kill the Commissioner and leave the scene if we don't get there in time. I just sent the location to Shinso's phone, but know this will be extremely dangerous, and don't let anyone go in alone greater than." A ding to his phone let Shinso and the others know they had the location. A few understood the time frame and guessed if they were fast enough, they could attack both rating points in a matter of half an hour. "That is a very good idea," Aizawa said with approval in his voice. But there was one girl who went wide-eyed at something else entirely, the voice of the Batman. It sounded familiar, far too familiar. Kyoka glanced at Momo and saw her elated face at the prospect of finishing the exam soon, and wondered if she should mention anything. She decided against it for now, as they needed to focus on what Batman had to say. "What is the chance that she is the one who finds out who Batman is?" asked Zero. Nearly 100%, replied Denki. Less than I'll meet you on the rooftop across the street from the Iceberg Lounge, and from there I'll help with the Penguin before heading to the Riddler's location greater than. Kenzo nodded to this, not seeing anything wrong with it. Alright, Batman, we'll meet you there. Everyone, let's move out now. We've got the details ironed out and have the Riddler's location. Let's move out, people. Shinso looked and saw that Batman hung you. He didn't waste time on the face. He sounded faintly familiar, and instead stood up and gestured to Cure. Let's go, we got work to do. Good job, you have a very good and decent plan, but remember it hardly survives its first draft. Ryaku spoke to everyone as they nodded in thanks to the dragon hero. Hiyori nodded as she stood and waved to the heroes as they left and got into the elevator, leaving the heroes to get ready and depart for the raid. But it was as they got ready that Kyoka took Momo to the side and away from the other. They were already dressed by this point and were only waiting for the others to get their support equipment. The punk girl put her earphone jacks into the wall to make sure no one could listen in on them, and after a few seconds, she nodded and removed her jacks. Momo tilted her head at her best friend and asked, "What's wrong with you? You seemed a little distressed." Kyoka sighed and grabbed the hem of her leather jacket. I know who Batman is. Called it, Denki said with a smile as a few sighed and others rolled their eyes. The heiress's eyes went wide as she then stammered out her response, "WWHO?" Kyoka took a deep breath to steady herself before she said, "It's with Izuku." The Batman had parked the Batmobile and was now perched across the street from Iceberg Lounge on the roof of a building and overlooking the street. He surveyed the building and already sent the Bat inside to spy on the guards' patrol patterns and locations. It was as he looked through the eyes of the Bat that he felt a drop of water hit his shoulder instinctively yet slowly. He looked up into the dark, cloudy sky and heard the crackle of thunder as lightning lit up the sky and surrounding shadows. A heavy storm was coming. Very good job. That is an excellent way to get some quick intel before you start to job, Aizawa said with a nod. The Dark Knight narrowed his eyes as he thought to himself that bad could cause problems. A communication may stop working, the rain will flood the streets, and the most worrying is the fact that this all seems to be according to the Riddler's plan. His eyeliner dropped back down to the Iceberg Lounge once again, and he could hear police chatter in his earpiece coming from the police radio line, talking about problems with the communications tower of the city. Things were bound to get worse from there, he surmised, but Izuku just hoped he and his classmates could endure it and come out of this victorious in the end. The sounds of footsteps were heard behind Izuku as he looked upon the Iceberg Lounge. He didn't turn to address them and instead spoke out loud, "Are you ready?" Bakugo scoffed in response and crossed his arms, but Mina and Sue nodded and verbally replied, "Yup, yes, we are." A few people rolled their eyes, typical Bakugo, they thought to themselves. The Batman stood from his crouched position and walked to them and spoke, "Get your teams in position, when the clock hits 8, we strike." Bakugo growled and got into his face, "And why should we listen to a freak in a mask?" Izuku's eyes narrowed but didn't go further than that as he responded, "Because we don't have time for you to try and compensate for what's in between your legs. We have shit to do and if you get in my way I'll put you down." A large portion of the people in the theater are right laughing at this as Bakugo glared at the screen with large explosions coming from his palms. Almost frothing at the mouth, Bakugo shouted, "WHO the fuck do you think you?" Aizawa glared at his student, "Bakugo, under no condition do you ever, and I mean ever, let you ego get to you. You especially in this situation where you can alert the villains that you are onto them and give away your position to the Aizawa said, completely serious as Bakugo looked away and scoffed at this. He was stopped by a kidney punch that lifted him a foot off the ground and dropped him like a sack of potatoes. A large number of them snickered, and people got even more amused by Bakugo's fate. Coughing and sucking in breath after getting the wind knocked out of him, Bakugo stayed in the fetal position clutching his side in pain, unable to get up or move. Batman just looked at him before slowly raising his gaze to the other three. Shoto was stoic, but the small amount of panic in his eyes told Izuku he was worried. The two girls were unable to keep their composure as well as their stoic classmate. They tried their best, but not as well as they wished, because Izuku noted their trembling hands and sweat forming on their brows. The said people shifted in their seats as they could all admit that it was very unsettling. If you speak up like that again and give away your position to the guards at the front door, I'll knock you out completely instead of just knocking the wind out of you, Batman said coldly. Izuku then turned his gaze back to the other three. Get to your positions, I'll attack the Penguin head-on once the raid starts. Mina nodded shakily as she went and picked up Bakugo with the help of Shoto. However, Tsuyu had stayed frozen in place and was shaking even when the others beckoned her to go with them to the fire escape. Izuku turned his attention to the frog-quirked girl and walked to her. He heard Mina gasp in panic, but he didn't give it much mind as he closed the distance between himself and Taisu. His boots stopped a few inches away from her, his form was taller and towered over her, shaking from causing her to shake even more. The said teenager frowned but did admit that in this suit and especially the situation, Izuku was incredibly intimidating and her animal instincts probably were going all over the place. But unlike what the heroes thought his reactions would be, he instead gently placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke calmly. Froppy, you're a good heroine and a brave young woman. You don't need to be fearful of me. The ones who need to fear me are the criminals and villains in this exam. Taisu gained a blush when she heard Izuku complimenting her like that, as a few girls around her gave her jealous looks. Sue nodded but was still shaking. To understand, but I can't help but fear what you're capable of after seeing you take down explosion like that. Izuku understood mentally what she was saying and nodded. I won't hurt you, Tsuyu-san, you have my word. Her shaking lessened at hearing that before stopping fully. She took a deep breath to calm her nerves, before looking up into her eyes. Thanks for that. It's fine, now if you'd excuse me, I have to get into position. The Batman turned and walked over to the roof's ledge and stepped up onto it. He took his grapple gun out and shot it across to a building farther back behind the iceberg lounge before being catapulted into the sky. Tsuyu and the others watched on as he disconnected the grapple midair and put it into his until belt. He then extended his cape and glided onto the lounge's rooftop. So manly, Kirishima yelled out. Amazing, Denki shouted, and so on, as just about everyone had large stars in their eyes seeing Izuku like that. Wow, he's something else, said Mina in awe. Tsuyu nodded to this with a faint blush. You can say that again, Kiro. Bakugo grinned at hearing their words. I hate you all. We know, Bakugro, we know, Kirishima responded to the future version of his friend. The stoic Shoto rolled his eyes. Yeah, we know that already. Fuck you, replied the still out of it Bakugo, and following what future Shoto did, including the said teenager, everyone pretty much rolled their eyes at Bakugo. A couple of minutes later, Shino pressed down on his watch, seeing it was about to turn 8 p.m., and landed on his walkie-talkie, speaking to everyone on the channel. Everyone ready? Over. Less than front team, consisting of Pinking and Explosion, is ready. Over. Greater than, responded Mina, who was informed by an officer to say over after finishing. Aizawa sighed. It looks like I'm going to have to go over again what you do when preparing to go in for a raid, the underground teacher of 1A said. Next came Shoto's voice. Less than, this is Frostburn and Froppy of the rear entrance squad. We're ready. Over. Greater than. Finally, Shino's partner Kiyori spoke over the radio. Less than, this is back entrance police leader Kiyori. We are ready. Over. Greater than. Shino's nodded to this and turned to see that people were also ready by showing thumbs up or nodding. Seeing this, he then led into this walkie-talkie and spoke to all teams. Then you are all clear to engage. I repeat, you are all clear to engage. Over. The detective pulled his pistol out and waved the SWAT team to go in after the heroes, who did just that. Bakugo blasted the front android guards, and Mina slid in next to him. The riot shields went in right after them, with the rest of the officers following suit. He could hear screaming and saw civilians exiting the front, where his spare officers would intercept and take them to the safety line after verifying they weren't criminals. Shino watched on until he heard something come in over his radio a few minutes later. Less than, the Batman has the Penguin. I repeat, the Batman has the Penguin. Over. Greater than. Everyone had smiled when hearing that. In the Penguin's office, the Penguin slammed his hands on his desk as he stood up from his chair. What, they attack now? His android ground nodded feverishly. Yes, sir, that's what I said. Listen, Penguin sir, we gotta get you gotta here. Penguin scowled heavily. Fine, but help me get my safe money in a bag first, and be quick with it. Several heroes scoffed that this was so common for crime bosses to do. The grunt nodded again. Yees, sir. The two grabbed stacks of bills, shoving them in a duffel bag before hearing the sounds of gunfire in the hallway leading to the office. They both stopped what they were doing and turned to the door. Several heroes smirked when they heard that and waited for the inevitable to come. Not even a few seconds later, the door was busted open by a big, burly android thug being kicked straight through it and into the glass coffee table. Upon seeing Batman, the Penguin reached under his desk and grabbed a Tommy gun. "Ah, if it isn't the Bat Freak, you came here for little old me. I'm flattered, truly, but why don't I give you a welcome gift from the establishment here? Eat lead, freak," shouted Penguin as he shot round after round into the dark night. Only he would have if the Batman hadn't dodged quickly to the side and thrown a batarang into the gun barrel, causing it to explode and for the Penguin to drop it with blood dripping from hands. "That is very useful, jamming a gun like that," Aizawa said with a nod. "It would be nice if he had some of those, especially if they worked on gun quirks like Lady Nagant's quirk." Nothing too bad but a few cuts on his palms and fingers. Penguin, however, cried out in fake agony and fell to his knees. Meanwhile his front whipped out his pistol and fired at the vigilante. The bullets merely ricocheted off his suit and flew into the walls around him. His walk toward the two went unimpeded as he glared into the eyes of the grunt. "So cool," Kota said with stars replacing his eyes as everyone nodded. "Agreed, it is so manly," Kirishima said with a large smile on his face. Shaking in fear at the image of Batman, the grunt fell backward onto his rear and dropped his now empty pistol. "What are you?" Grabbing the grunt by his collar and bringing him in close, Izuku answered, "I'm Batman." "Hell yeah, you are," Mariko responded with a large grin on her face. A fist to the grunt android's head caused it to go unconscious, and Batman turned his attention to the wide-eyed Penguin. "Why you wouldn't hurt a guy in glasses, would you?" "Yes, he will," Shoji said with his arms somehow crossed. Narrowing his eyes, Izuku grabbed him by the neck and lifted him off the ground, and leaned into his face. "What is the Riddler planning?" Penguin narrowed his own eyes in response. "I can't tell ya, the guy is very secretive." "That's just going to piss him off, won't it?" Zero asked with a blank look on his face. With someone who knows what's going to happen and refusing to tell him with so little time left, yes, absolutely, All Might said with a small frown on his face. Izuku growled and pushed him against the glass roughly, causing it to crack. Penguin, in turn, grunted and said, "Ah, come on, this is police brutality. I'm not a cop, and that very reason is why someone like you should be afraid," the Batman said before punching the glass next to Penguin's head, causing it to shatter immediately. He then lifted the Penguin with one hand and dangled him out the window over the 40-foot drop. "You're crazy, man, fucking crazy," shouted the Penguin in actual fear of falling. "Holy shit." Denki cried out. "You know, I think anyone would crave under that situation," Mina said as pretty much everyone agreed with her. Fearing for his literal life, the Penguin genuinely caved under the pressure. "He has plans for the election ceremony later this evening. It's happening in an hour or so, I think. That's all I know, I swear." Izuku brought him back into the office and leaned into his face. "You better not lie to me." I'm not, I swear," cried out Penguin. Aizawa smirked. "I should try this," he thought to himself. Seeing the genuine fear and truth in his eyes, Izuku dropped him roughly onto the ground full of glass. It was at this time that Kirishima entered with Kyoka. Kirishima pressed onto his earpiece and spoke to the others. "The Batman has the Penguin. I repeat, the Batman has the Penguin, over." Izuku turned and addressed Kirishima. "Red Riot, the Riddler is planning to attack the mayor's ceremony tonight. Send heroes and police there after you're done here." Many pros nodded in agreement with what Izuku did. The Batman, without waiting for a response, turned and used his grapple to shoot into the skylight and rocket himself onto the roof, leaving the two to arrest Penguin. However, Kyoka shouted out with her arm reaching for him, "Wait." But it was too late, and Izuku was already gone. Kirishima turned to her curiously and asked, "What was that about earphone jack?" The punk girl glanced at him before turning her head back to the glass window above them that Batman had left through. It's nothing, forget about it." The said punk girl couldn't suppress the small frown that went across her face. Kirishima, a few seconds later, nodded hesitantly and went to arrest the other two, although he did glance a couple of times her way incuriously on why she had called out to him. With the second raid team. Kendo heard the others' radio in the Penguin was apprehended, and she smiled. Good work, everyone. When the Batman gets here, we'll start our raid. Talk to you when we're done here, over. She heard a few different replies from the other teams, but didn't bother responding as they were all telling her and her team good luck. She waited with Momo and Uraraka by her side, with a few other hero students around the perimeter of the building. The redhead took notice of the creation user's tapping of her foot, and every once in a while, he sighed deeply, mixed with the contemplating look Momo had made Kendo wonder what happened. So with time to spare until the Batman arrived, she leaned into the rabbit's side and asked, "What's wrong, Momo?" "Nothing much, just finding out who the Batman is," Denki said a bit, which resulted in Jiro zapping him slightly with her jacks. The vice president of Class 1A froze, and then her shoulders sagged. "I've been informed of something and I am unsure how to feel about it." Kendo raised a brow and glanced at Uraraka, who shrugged back, being just as clueless as her. The redhead glanced back at Momo before inquiring, "And that would be?" Momo twiddled her thumbs together and looked down at her feet. She contemplated telling the truth, deciding to do just that. I know who." She was cut off as the Batman glided in from the sky and landed a few feet away from the. His crouched figure stood up slowly and showed off his new suit in all its glory. "So manly," Kirishima whispered to the now dubbed god of manliness in his mind. "Battle Fist, create, gravity. Are you all ready to head inside?" The Dark Knight asked the three heroines. Momo visibly froze before blushing as red as her cape. Kendo and Uraraka noticed but didn't say anything as they turned their attention back to Batman. Kendo stepped forward to meet him halfway as he walked to them. "We're ready, we were just waiting on you." Izuku glanced at Momo, inspecting her for a moment before speaking to his eyes shifted back to Kendo. "I've detected 2 heat signatures in the building, one is without a doubt the commissioner, while the other is most likely the Riddler." Aizawa slightly frowned as this just screamed a trap to him. Digesting the information for a moment, Kendo nodded, "All right, but this sounds suspiciously easy, almost like it's a trap." "That's exactly what it is, but we have no choice but to go along with it if we want the commissioner to stay alive," interrupted Batman. "Agreed," Aizawa spoke. Kendo pouted at this and let out a big sigh. Gh a few seconds later, he was right. No matter how they wanted to approach this, there was only one way to do it. "All right, Batman, I want you to stay hidden if you can, use the shadows or whatever, but help us when we need you." "All right, Batman, and I want you to stay hidden if you can, use the shadows or whatever, but help us when we need you." Izuku nodded to this. "When you're ready, we'll head inside." "So far, so good, but how long will it last?" Iida asked, as many just looked at the screen. Kendo turned to Momo and Uraraka, who gave a nod, and the police stationed around the building gave her a thumbs up to proceed. "All right, the rest of you stay and catch the Riddler if he runs." "Let's do this, people," said Kendo while walking to the front doors of the orphanage. The doors creaked open, the hinges audibly creaking the entire time. Kendo, along with her 2 companions, entered with Batman far behind Batman as he skulked through the shadows while using his detective vision to watch out for traps. They made their way through the abandoned building, going through torn-up rooms and a trashed kitchen area, but found no traps in sight, which worried them. "This is extremely worrying," All Might said. "We just saw how he trapped the last hostage, and now his supposed base is completely defenseless. This just doesn't add up." He spoke as everyone agreed with the former number-one hero. It was strangely safe, not what they expected at all from the Riddler of all people, who had booby-trapped a neck collar not even a day ago at this point. When they got to the top floor, the floor near the bell tower entrance, they found their man and the Riddler. The green leather trench coat wearing man took notice of them rather quickly and greeted them. "Hello heroes, and Batman, I know you're out there. I half expected you to be in a body bag after that explosion. But then again, it's hard to kill a symbol such as yourself." Batman glared at the villain into making a move to show himself just yet. He instead looked around the room and noticed something odd about it. The walls were reinforced somehow and lined with explosives that were connected to a deadman switch in the Riddler's hand. Everyone glared at the Riddler through the screen, as this was a horrible situation to be in. The Batman, seeing nothing he could do, stepped out of the shadows and walked until he was a few feet away from the Riddler. Why is this room reinforced and rigged to blow? You're too smart to blow yourself if you somehow lose. The Riddler chucked at this while Momo, Kendo, and Uraraka paled a deathly while at the news. And you'd be right, Batman, but I have one thing you don't, Dark Knight, to keep me safe. And what would that be, Riddler? Inquired Kendo, who was nervously sweating from the thought of the room exploding any second now. Riddler smiled under his mask and pointed in front of him. He surprised him as he knocked on the perfectly blended glass they hadn't seen until now. I have blast-proof glass keeping me safe from the explosives, which happen to be on only your side of the room. I hate it when villains do that, as they can be hard to see, Miriko said with her arms crossed over her chest. Batman continued to glare, but his hands moved under his cape, grabbed his hacking device, his fingers tapped a few times, activating the Deadman's switch to disarm it, and the bombs connected to it. However, he knew this would take time. What's your game, Riddler? There's more to this than just a simple trap. How do we save the Commissioner without exploding? Spoke the Batman in a deathly serious tone. The Riddler nodded and patted the Commissioner's shoulder, drawing their attention to the hostage, just now noticing the stage contraption was strapped into. The Commissioner is a very corrupt man, Dark Knight, so I've made a contraption to drown this rat like the victims of his greed. I'm going to ask a series of riddles which you all will answer separately. Every wrong answer and the Commissioner gets dunked under the water, progressively getting longer and longer in duration till he drowns. Everyone's glare towards the Riddler only severely increased at this. Momo placed a hand on her mouth in horror while Uraraka cursed out, "Why you monster?" Riddler turned and glanced at him. "Oh, you've seen nothing yet, Uravity. Now, are you all ready for the first riddle?" Kendo scowled and clenched her hands into fists. "Yes, but I swear we will put you behind bars by the end of this." Clapping, the Riddle walked over to the lever to dunk the Commissioner and addressed them. "That can only happen if you get out of this alive." Two big spotlights turned on at that moment, not facing the Riddler and his contestants. The Riddler gestured to the camera that was previously hidden under a trap that had been thrown mechanically. "It's showtime, people of Gotham. I know you just love hearing my voice and seeing your heroes blunder. Tonight, however, we have special guests." The knowledge-themed villain landed on the Commissioner's side. "Say hello, Loeb, to all the people watching at home." Commissioner Loeb growled at the man but was unable to answer since he was gagged with a leather belt. The Riddle noticed this and shrugged. "Oh well, seems he's not that talkative this evening." He turned back to the heroes and the vigilante. "Before the first riddle, let's introduce our contestants today. First, we have the lovely Kriti, the bubbly Uravity, and the ever-strong Battle Fist." The Riddler then dramatically gasped, "But what's this? Is that? Oh my god, it is. It's the Dark Knight, the Batman himself. I hate villains like this," Aizawa said with his eyes briefly shifting red, showing the quick activation of his quirk. The Riddler grabbed a computer monitor that displayed a live chat feed. "Ah, the people are surprised to see you still alive, Batman, from our last encounter. But that's not surprising since they saw you almost die." Batman took a step forward and spoke threateningly. "Enough with your games, Riddler." Riddler froze and then sighed, letting the monitor go and swinging back to his side. "You're no fun, Batman, but since you've been so gracious to go first, I'll ask the first riddle to you and you alone." He gave the heroines a stern look. "No backseating girls." Grabbing the lever to the dunk mechanism, the villain asked the first riddle. "Why is corn so hard to escape from?" "A maze," Momo said almost instantly as Nezu smiled at her. Now that Izuku wasn't expecting it, it didn't make sense until he brainstormed for a few moments. "Maze, the answer is because it's a corn maze, that's why it's so hard to escape." "Good job, Momo," Mina said with a smile. Riddler clapped gleefully. Goody, you've gotten just a step closer to releasing the Commissioner, only 4 more riddles to go." He turned his attention to Kendo. "Battle first, your riddle is this. What is always on time but never arrives?" Kendo blinked rapidly, but had nothing on her mind, and it looked like her future self was in the same situation. "Tomorrow, Iida said. "Then, KS, but I don't think my future self will get it right." Kendo blanked mentally, and she turned to the others. However, the Riddler saw this and chastised her. No help from the other contestant. Battle fist. Eyes on the prize or my hand my slip. 2. I don't know, she answered dejectedly a few seconds later. Riddler shook his head side to side in dramatic disappointment as a loud buzzer sound was heard and a big X was shown on a screen above the commissioner. Ah, too bad, battle first. Now it's time for the consequences. The villain pulled the lever, tilting the commissioner back into the bathtub filled to the brim with water. The Riddler then started counting along with the screen's timer. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Kendo looked down, hating herself for putting the commissioner under the water. Before pulling the lever in the other direction, getting the commissioner above water and allowing them to gap, loudly sucking in air as much as he could through the gag. The heroes were stunned and horrified while Izuku tapped even faster on his hacking tool, making him 1/5 of the way done with the hack. Riddler then turned his head to Uraraka. It's Uraraka's turn, now your riddle is. I feel your every move, I know your every thought. I'm with you from birth, and I'll see you when I rot. What an eye. Reflection, Momo and Iida said at the same time. Uraraka paled and her mind raced with thoughts. Her first thought went to Shadow, but it didn't feel right since shadows aren't known for having eyes, but then she realized something, she knew the answer. Reflection, it's your reflection. She yelled out, gasping her hands together in fear of being wrong and a bit of hope of being right. The riddled pauses made the room grow tense, that was until he cheered loudly, correct. You've gotten another step closer to winning the Riddler's grand show. Good job, Uraraka, Mina said with a smile on her face as Uraraka smiled back at her friend. Looking at Momo next, the villain pointed to her. Your turn, Kriti. Your riddle is, I have a million eyes yet live in darkness, I have a million ears but only 4 lobes. I have no muscles, yet rule 2 hemispheres, what am I? The human brain, Iida said as Momo nodded in agreement. Momo knew this one immediately and answered quickly, the human brain. The Riddler looked shocked by this but nodded. You are correct, but don't get cocky, heroes. It gets even harder from here in the second round. He turned to Izuku and poked once more. What is the endgame of my plan, Dark Knight? Many glared at using a riddle that Izuku couldn't solve. Izuku glared at the Riddler for using a riddle he couldn't answer. I don't know, but it has something to do with the seawall surrounding Gotham and the mayor's election ceremony in less than an hour. Riddler smiled cockily underneath his mask. Ah, that's not the answer I was looking for, and here I thought you were smarter than this, Dark Knight. Pulling the lever again, the commissioner was dunked underwater, but this time he was underneath for 30 seconds before being led up again. One more wrong answer and he'll be under for a full minute, so do be careful with your answers, said the Riddler in a cold tone, completely gone from his previous joyful attitude, making both Uraraka and Momo feel a shiver run down their spines. The Batman looked, using his detective vision to see he was 3/5 of the way done with hacking the bombs. He could only hope they had enough time to disarm them and get the commissioner to safety before anything could make the situation worse. Nezu looked shocked but smiled at that, as many others also felt much better and smiled. However, it seemed luck was not on their side as Riddler pressed a button on his demon switch. For getting 2 riddles wrong, the room you are in will slowly be pressed down onto you and inevitably crush you. So, focus up or you'll all turn into pancakes. And the situation just got much worse, Snipe said with a frown. Damn, Izuku cursed, now feeling even more pressure on himself and the others. Riddler pointed to his next target, Battle Fist. You didn't do so well in the first round, so hopefully you do better this time. Your next riddle is this. I was there in the beginning, I'll be there in the end. I've seen all and have heard everything known to the universe. What an eye. Time, Iida and Momo both said, getting a smile and nod from their principal. Kendo took a shaky breath. The pressure was on as the old picture frames on the walls were slowly pushed off and landed on the ground, throwing glass everywhere. She had already fucked up one riddle, so she told herself she couldn't fuck up again. She searched her mind for the answer while keeping in mind the time she had left until they were crushed. Wait, time. The answer was time, she shouted. Riddler clapped but this time spoke in an annoyed tone. You're unfortunately correct, leaving one more riddle for you to win it all. Good job, Kendo, Uraraka congratulated her. The Riddler turned to Momo, Kriti, it's your turn again. This time your answer must be given in the given time frame. You have 20 seconds on the clock. Are you ready? Momo gulped as she looked at the giant monitor above the commissioner with a timer. She was extremely grateful for Ararik's comforting hand on her shoulder. Riddler nodded. Your riddle is this. A rich heiress lives in luxury. Her needs are taken care of, until she is thrown into the outside world. It's then that she realizes her one and true love. What am I? Any guesses for this one? The Ravenet panicked as the timer ticked down. Her mind raced, but she couldn't find an answer. When the timer had reached 8 seconds, she shouted out something random on impulse. Izuku Midoriya. The girl's face flushed into a deep crimson color as she blushed darkly, as many of the people around her laughed at her answer. I was not expecting that answer. I guess you were speaking from first-hand experience? Asked Riddler teasingly, causing Momo to blush and shoot her eyes at Batman for a moment. Even Riddler is surprised, Mina said in between laughs, making her face turn even darker. She turned away when she saw Batman looking right at her. Izuku, upon hearing her accidental confession, was surprised and had to try hard to keep himself from accidentally revealing the hacking decision. Cue several chuckles from her classmates. He didn't stop his fingers from tapping on the screen of his hacking device, even while flustered. He did, however, note in his mind that he needed to speak with Momo after the exam was over. The ceiling was about 2 feet from their heads and was slowly descending. Izuku tapped faster in response while the Riddler spoke up to his unwilling contestants. That wasn't the answer I was looking for, so down goes the commissioner once again. Hopefully, you do better on the next riddle, responded the Riddler, slightly disappointed. Momo looked down in slight embarrassment at her answer, and that caused the commissioner to be dumped into the water. Pulling the lever, the commissioner was dunked once more for a full minute. In that time, however, Izuku had almost finished his hack and, with the use of his detective vision, found a way to get through the glass and the commissioner. Just about everyone had smiled at that, knowing that it would be over soon. The Batman glanced at Kendo and spoke in a whisper to be heard by her and the other girls, but not by the villain. I have the bombs almost defused and have a plan to get through the class. Be ready to move when I do. Kendo turned to him with hope in her eyes. She didn't give a verbal response in worry that the Riddler would catch on, so she gave the Dark Knight a nod, with the other doing the same. And that's 1 full minute. Next time it'll be 1 minute and 30 seconds. And I don't know about you all, but I don't think the commissioner can handle that due to years of smoking, so be careful with your next answer, Uravity, said Riddler smugly after pulling the disheveled commissioner out of the water. The Riddler looked at the live chat and saw some pretty interesting comments. It seems the public is raving about that last answer, and I can't blame them since it came out of nowhere. Momo turned an even darker shade of red at that. Momo blushed again at this and realized that most of UA probably now knew about her crush on Izuku, who just so happened to be right next to her if Kyoka's hunch was right. More than a few girls chucked at her misfortune, as at that reminder, her entire face turned a very deep shade of red. Shaking his head, the Riddler gestured to Uraraka. Your riddle is this, Uravity, I can be cracked. I can be made. I can be told. I can be played. What am I? Both Momo and Iida blinked at that riddle and had no clue what it could be, as they seemed to have no relationship with the others. Scrambling for an answer as the seconds passed, the ceiling was now just half a foot away from the tallest of them, being the Batman. Uraraka was struggling to find an answer as her mind raced. Crack, made, told, played. What the hell does any of that have anything to do with the same thing? This has to be like Batman's riddle, all just a big joke so that we fail and the commissioner dies along with us. The timer had reached 10 seconds left when Uraraka came to a realization. She had accidentally come to the answer in her little rant. A joke. The answer is a joke. The screen above Riddler flashed a green indication that she was correct. Good job, Uravity, and here I thought you were going to fail with only 3 seconds left on the clock. Wow, good job with that one, Uraraka. I had no idea for that one, Iida admitted to his friend as she smiled at him. Momo patted the brunette's back in a way to show how happy she was that Uraraka got hers right, but the ceiling was still slowly falling onto them with Izuku having to bind forward. The Riddler seemed to be having fun seeing the Dark Knight's discomfort. It's your turn. Batman, and this is a riddle I've already asked once before. Izuku glared into the eyes of the Riddler. Something wasn't right. The riddles he had given so far were easy enough for him to complete quickly, even the ones the other had failed, and he wouldn't use the riddle he had just asked him. So what was the Riddler getting at? Don't get so angry, Dark Knight, your riddle is this. Who is the Batman? Momo, Kendo, and Uraraka played with the latter, gasping and looking at Izuku in worry, Momo more so as she wondered what Izuku would do and if Kyoka was right about his true identity. A few others also looked in worry. The Riddler smirked under his mask at Batman, believing to have caught him in a trap once more. What's wrong, Batman? It's a simple riddle that you have the answer to already. Kendo yelled out at the villain in anger as she started bending down with the other, as the roof was pressing down on them. That's cheating. You've asked him almost impossible riddles since he got the first one right. Riddler rolled his eyes. That's the point, my dear, I'm a villain. I can be as unfair as I want, so don't go spouting such crap to me. After all, why play a game I can't win? As much as I hate it, this is something a villain would do, Aizawa said with a frown. While Riddler chastised Kendo, Batman saw using his detective vision that the hack was completed. He now had the bomb disarmed, the dead man's switch, and most importantly, the ceiling hydroelectric system was now also in his control. All the students cheered at that, and most of the pro-heroes smiled at the turn for the heroes this time. The dark and brooding voice of the Batman was heard, getting everyone's attention back on him. You're not winning this day, Riddler. Turning his head curiously, the leather-clad villain asked, and why is that, Dark Knight? Narrowing his eyes, Izuku lifted the hacking device out from his cape for all to see, because I have a trick up my sleeve, after all. Who wants to play a game they know they'll lose? That is a good comeback. I should probably write that down, Denki said with a smile on his face. Riddler's eyes widened, and he pressed the deadpan witch only for nothing to happen. He pressed it again, and then again and again in frustration. The ceiling had stopped descending as he did this and instead started lifting back up. Growling, the Riddler threw the deadman witch and cursed the caped crusader. You cheating bastard, how did you get past my genius intellect? Crybaby, Zero said as many had smirks on their faces. Izuku stood to his full height now that the roof over his head was back in its previous position. You got too cocky. Aizawa nodded in agreement with Izuku. Gritting his teeth under his mask, the Riddler looked around before smiling. I haven't lost yet, Batman. The Leather Clan villain turned sharply and pulled the lever to dunk the commissioner, and then ran quickly to the door leading to the bell tower before stopping. Too bad for you, Batman, that mechanism is fully mechanical and not electronic. Even without the bombs, I still win. The villain fled up the staircase leading to the top of the bell tower. A second later, Kendo and the other girls became shocked and turned to Batman, hoping he could get them through the glass in time to save the commissioner. Like Izuku had promised, he had a plan. Using his small explosives, he placed them down next to the floor in front of the glass and detonated them a second later. The floor under the glass caved in due to the explosion and fell into the room directly under them. That is a good plan to get the glass out of your way, especially as he is putting a no-quirk limitation on himself for the exam, Gran Torino said as he nodded, and others nodded in agreement. Moving quickly, Izuku and the heroines jumped down and used their methods to get back up onto the other side of the glass with the commissioner. Izuku used his grapple gun, Kendo slammed her enlarged hands onto the ground to launch herself up, Momo used a metal pole to pole vault up, and Uraraka used her quirk to make herself float. They reached the commissioner with Kendo using her hands to break the mechanism apart with Uraraka helping get the commissioner out. While doing so, the red-headed hero leader turned to Batman and Momo and ordered them. Batman, Kriti, go after the Riddler, we've got the commissioner. You just don't know when to quit, do you? Shouted the panting villain angrily. No, he doesn't, Chio said with a blank look on her face before glaring at All Might as the said hero shifted in his seat. Batman glared but didn't answer as he took out his grapple gun and shot it into the ceiling above the Riddle. Thinking fast, the villain used a combat knife to attempt to cut through the wire. The keyword was attempt, as the knife couldn't make a dent in the reinforced steel wire. Riddler shouted an animalistic sound of rage as he dropped his attempt and went up the ladder and through the trap door leading to the bell. The robe of that grapple gun must be very strong then, Power Loader said in approval as others agreed with him. Izuku didn't waste time as he threw his arm around Momo's waist, causing her to yelp. They then, in no time, flew up the stairwell and hopped over the railing when they got to the top of the stairs. Looking up through the floor using his detective vision, Izuku saw the Riddler grab onto a zip line and hump off the tower and follow the zip line's path. You have to admit he has some pretty decent robes for his grapple gun, David said with a smile on his face, though his mind, along with his daughter's mind, was racing, thinking of different ways to improve Izuku's Batman suit. The Batman hurried up the ladder, followed by Momo. He threw the hatch open to get to the bell-holding part of the tower, and he was just in time to watch as the Riddler landed on top of an apartment building's roof and ran to the roof access door. The sky was pouring rain, and lightning was cracking through the sky, thunder booming as it did so. He's escaping. Send police to the south apartment building while I pursue him, ordered Batman. Aizawa nodded, though he also narrowed his eyes. He didn't know why, but for some reason, something about this felt off. Momo flinched at the idea of the Riddler escaping. She wholeheartedly agreed to the idea and spoke into her radio in a hurry. Units converge on the south apartment building. The suspects had fled the area and are now in that apartment building. And send some medics for the commissioner while you're at it. Good job in making sure he can't escape, Mike said with his usual smile on his face as Momo smiled at being praised by her teacher. She turned to the Batman and asked, "We'll meet you there, good luck." Izuku. The Batman paused just before he jumped from the tower to follow after the Riddler. He turned back to her and stared into her eyes for a moment. "I'll talk to you once this is all over, Momo, and tell Kyoka that she did well, suspecting me from just hearing my voice." "How?" Denki asked, shocked at how he knew Jiro was the one who found out. "Because he is Batman," Kota said, doing a horrible impression of Izuku as his aunt smiled at his impression of his idol. Momo's eyes went wide, and she asked, "How?" But it was too late. Izuku jumped from the tower and opened his cape to glide towards the apartment the Riddler had fled to, with rain splashing his face as he flew through the night sky. Leaving Momo to clench the fabric of her suit over her heart as she started on at the man that she had fallen for, she felt a warmth in her chest before she felt horror take over. "Oh my God, I did confess to liking him when he was right next to me." Thought the heiress was in complete embarrassment. Her face turned an already deeper shade of red than it was. With Izuku, the hallway of the apartment building was quiet, with the only sound coming from a hanging light bulb that buzzed as it flicked on and off repeatedly. But suddenly the window of the hallway was busted open, the Batman gliding through it and landing on the hallway floor with a roll, the glass spreading out all over the floor with a water pattern into the tile now that the window was broken. The dark figure stood up and used his detective vision to look through the entire building. He found only one heat signa, Ture, which was down the hall in the last room on the right that had its door hanging half open, as if someone opened it in a hurry and didn't bother closing it. "Well, that is where he is," Tokiyami said as many agreed. The Dark Knight walked through the shattered glass leading to the window with the sound of the stormy wind howling in the background. His boots echoed quietly as he moved to the open door leading to an apartment. The door is slightly open, allowing him to see into the living space. He saw that it seemed to be living in for some time, now with hordes of books, notebooks, and other miscellaneous items strewn about. The Batman's hand pushed the door open fully, allowing him entry and a full view of the inside. The door creaked slowly as he did so, and he walked right into the apartment to come upon the Riddler on the far side of the room. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this, I was supposed to win." Raven, the lunatic, slammed his hand on the table before going back to what he was doing. "Can he act even more psychotic?" Mina asked as a few shrugged. "It can always get worse," Aizawa said almost instantly. The Batman stayed silent as he saw a blade-type object stabbed into the desk with old blood stains. On it, Izuku could also hear typing on a keyboard, which he assumed to be the Riddler. "Your game is over, Riddler," stated the Batman coldly. A moment of pause as the Riddler stopped typing a second later and turned around to address the vigilante. "The fact you believe it's over is funny, Batman, because it is far from over." Batman intercepted the blade inches away from his face. The Riddler, having grabbed the blade from the table and tried slashing, but wasn't fast enough. What was your end goal, Riddler? Demanded the vigilante. Yeah, we never got that from him, Iida said. One final riddle, Uraraka said with slightly narrowed eyes. Riddler, however, laughed like a psycho. That's the best part, Batman. He leaned into the vigilante's face, their eyes staring holes into each other. I've already given you the last riddle to piece it all together. All you have to do is look at the world around you. Narrowing his eyes, Izuku disarmed the villain and with a strong headbutt turned the Riddler unconscious, his body falling loosely to the carpeted floor with his glass broken in two. Many smirked at how quickly the Riddler fell into the hands of Izuku. The Batman stared at the Riddler for a few moments until police and heroes swarmed the room to see that the Batman had taken care of. The villain, Kendo, quickly walked over and thanked him. Thank you, Batman, for apprehending it from form here. Izuku shook his head. No, there's more here. The Riddler wouldn't gamble on his big plan like this, and we still haven't found what he planned for down in Gotham Square, the garden where the election ceremony is being held. Kendo paused, digesting his words, before nodding. She ordered some forensic people to come to the crime scene. Time skip. The Batman looked around the room while the Riddler was cuffed and dragged off to be arrested. Still unconscious, the heroes and some detectives stuck around help in evidence vidant for a while. Time passed slowly until it was 15 minutes left on the last, which was slowly ticking down on the monitors where the Riddler was earlier. And yet with all there they still hadn't found anything substantial besides the computer that was hooked to many monitors and a timer. The laptop was secured down onto the table, being unable to be taken out of the room, and needed a password to gain access to anything on it. Izuku couldn't even hack into it, which he found extremely odd. That's weird, he should be able to do it, Melissa said with a frown on her face. The forensic people came and went after time, leaving Batman, and Kendo, and leaving Detective Kiori, who came on the scene a bit later. The detective was a good helper when it came to cataloging the evidence of interest, but even with that, they hadn't found clues. Momo and Uraraka had also left to support the others at the place being used for the mayor election. Momo the Batman one look before going with Uraraka. Speaking of the ceremony, the building itself was a backup storm shelter in the center of the city and was mostly used as an auditorium or area for events or ceremonies. The Batman was still hard at work trying to figure out the end game of the Riddler, but he could feel that he was missing something that would explain everything. He read through some notebooks left behind but found nothing of substantial value, just some crazed thoughts of the villains he had apprehended. Eventually, he put it down and thought to himself. You have all the clues, will you find out Midoriya? Nezu said with a smile on his face, as many frowned at what he said. I've already given you the last riddle to piece it all together, all you have to do is look at the world around you. Those were the words of the Riddler, and Izuku couldn't help but feel that he wasn't taking notice of something important. Izuku revalued his fight with the Riddle, his every moment and every eve, his every action. Then, as if it flashed into his mind, he found something odd about his last encounter. Turning to Kendo and Kiori, who were looking through other pieces of evidence in the room, he shifted his eyes to the left of the Dark Knight and walked over to the table that had a plastic bag on it. His footsteps made the worn-out wood creak, catching the other two's attention. They watched the Batman grab the plastic bag and lift it to look at its contents. Many, including Aizawa's eyes, narrowed when they heard the creak in the floor as some parts of the carpet creaked and other parts didn't. Surprisingly, it was Kiori who spoke. Gotta hand it to the guy, he's one psycho to use a tucker as a weapon. I mean, who the hell does that? What's a tucker? Denki asked. Just wait a moment, I'm sure it will be explained, Momo said to her classmates. Slowly, the Batman swiveled his head to face Kiori, making said girl flinch. What did you say? Kiori gulped before, as, Ying, it's a weird thing ya know, to use a tucker to attack someone. Glancing back at the bag in his hand, Izuku opened it and took out the weapon and inspected it closely, asking, what is a tucker used for? The detective glanced at Nito, who gestured for her to answer the question. A little hesitantly, she did just that. It's for installing carpets. If you gotta place them or rip some out, you use a tucker to get in between the cracks where the floor meets the wall. He's hidden something under the carpet, Momo said with realization. Slowly but surely, This registered in his mind, and he glanced down at a worn-out green couch, on the second inspection to be made, to look worn but new in certain sections. He took a few steps back while staring at the carpet until he was off. Kendo and Kyori, seeing this, glanced to where he was looking and went wide-eyed. Kendo immediately looked up and asked with hope, "You don't think?" "Most likely," Iida said with crossed arms. Something felt off. The unasked question lingered in the air as the Batman used the tool to upturn a section and used his hands to tear the carpet from the floor, revealing what was underneath. "Oh my God," commented Kendo while covering her mouth. What was underneath the carpet was a carved map of the city with the large word, Genesis, carved in the center. Upon seeing the word, Izuku's eyes widened, and he quickly rushed over to the laptop and typed into it. He entered a second later, and the screen changed to a big green question mark. Simultaneously, the carving of the city lit up with LEDs, with some linking around the base of the sea wall. "He's not going to do that, is he?" Midnight asked with wide eyes. But then, to their surprise, a video started to play on the laptop and computer monitors. The image of the Riddler was shown through them all talking to a group chat of up to 50 people. "Thank you for all your support. I wouldn't know how I could have done it all without you guys. When I first saw, I had a dream to rid the streets of the filth and corruption. But it's only thanks to you all that I'm able to do it." The Riddler leaned back into his chair and spoke with a giddiness in his voice which soon turned into righteousness. "Fury, by now I've already been arrested by the heroes and authorities, so it'll be up to you to stand up and fight, to take up arms to make things right. To cast out the corrupt and make them face judgment." "He is," Aizawa said, deathly serious with a deep glare on his face. "Oh my God, he's not alone. He has people who are going to attack the Gotham election ceremony," shouted Kendo in complete disbelief. The Batman narrowed his eyes as he looked at the image of the Riddler. "That's not all. When the ceremony starts, the bombs we planted will detonate and flood the streets. The communications will be down due to the heavy storm. And the flooding will be so fast that any attempts at evacuation will be too late." The villain giggled and clapped his hands at this. "And the people will, in turn, have to flock to the Gotham Square garden where the ceremony is taking place. That's where you all come in. In the chaos, you will pick them off like drawing rats." Kendo panicked and leaned into her. "Kriti, this is Battle Fist, we need to evacuate. I repeat, evacuate Gotham Square now." All she got was static in return. Kendo quickly turned to see Kyori having the same problem on her radio and phone. "He planned this. He planned it all from the start, and we don't have enough time to warn the others," said Kendo somberly, and all hope quickly fading from her voice. The video, however, wasn't done. This time, the Riddler addressed directly. "You've made it this far, Batman, but what happens when all seems lost? Is there nothing you can do to save anyone? I wish I could see your face and hear your answer, but I have work to prep for your inevitable downfall. Goodbye, Batman, it was fun while it lasted." And with that, the screen turned, leaving the three standing there in shock, horror, and sadness. But Izuku was feeling something else entirely. He was angry, vengeful even, and clenched his fist before he tapped his earpiece. "Alfred, do you read me?" How can he still go?" Kendo asked, slightly shaking. "That's just how Midoriya is," Todoroki said with crossed arms. A few seconds later, he got a reply. "Yes, sir, I am here. What do you need from me?" "How much time do we have on the Riddler's latest riddle?" he asked in a hurry since the timer had shut off along with the monitors. "Sir, I'm sorry to say, but you're too late. The riddle is just now expiring as I speak." Boom. Izuku and the others rushed to the window of the apartment to see a garbage truck blow and the seawall crack before crumbling completely and letting the water come rushing into the city. "We failed, it's all over. We lost," stated Kendo blankly. As everyone's eyes widened, with the teachers looking towards Nezu. In the observation room, "So, this penguin fella is their first target of the night," said Snipe. Cementos huffed, "Seems so. And Midoriya is already fully prepared to take him down by the looks of it." The loud voice of Rumi echoed through the room. "Damn right here is. That stud is gonna whoop some major ass." "Damn right future me." The rabbit hero spoke to her future self. Sighing to her side, Ryukyu shook her head. Do you have to be so crude? Yes, she does, future me, Ryukyu said as her best friend playfully pouted. Leaning into her chair, Rumi raised a quirked eyebrow. In all the years you've known me since high school, might I add, have I ever, not, been crude, as you put it? Why am I your friend again? Smirking at her best friend, Rumi answered, because I'm a bitch with a fat ass. Facts, Mineta said with a perverse smile on his face, resulting in Rumi kicking him into a wall with disgust, as while she did have a gorgeous body, she hated it when men perved on her. Rolling her eyes, Ryukyu replied with a small smile, I was thinking it was due to the fact we were both too scary and intimidating to get boyfriends, but yeah, I guess that works too. Rumi's expression changed to a deadpanned look. Don't make me fuck Midoriya without you. Everyone looked at Rumi as she shrugged, but her best friend looked at her in horror at the fact that she would break their pact they had made in high school. That lucky bastard, why does it have to be him? It should, Mineta was saying until Bakugo blasted him into Momo, who bashed him with her metal bow staff as they were all getting tired of his perverted antics. Recoiling at this, Ryukyu jerked her head towards her friend. You wouldn't dare, we made a damn pact to do it with the same guy if we found one that was worthy. If possible, Mineta felt even more envy for Midoriya as Denki did feel jealous too, but was smart enough to keep his mouth shut. The rabbit-quirked woman shrugged with a small smile tugging at the edges of her lips. I don't know, he doesn't know, he does look pretty damn fine even with those dorky undies on the outside of his suit, although they are sorta cute and cup his ass pretty well, and... She was cut off as Izuku threatened and then punched Bakugo for almost revealing their position. The rabbit woman's eyes widened, and then she purred audibly. And just like her future self, Rumi had let out a loud purr from leaving her mouth. I'm so fucking him after this, stated the white-haired woman. Ryukyu nodded in a dazed state as her mind went blank at the show of dominance. Meanwhile those near them sweat dropped and sooted away from the visibly Henry woman. As did several men in the theater as both the woman did look visibly horny at seeing that. Toshinori looked upon the woman while shaking his head. Damn young Midoriya, you got game pulling not one, not two, but 3 older women is insane. And that's without mentioning the other girls pinning after you who are your age. The said woman blushed, and a few gave looks to All Might who shrugged. What can't he be proud of his successor, that he generally thought of as his son? The blonde man almost teared up with how proud he was, but before he or the others knew it, the raid started. Right after Izuku interrogated Penguin, holy shit, was the thought that was simultaneously in the minds of everyone in the room. Did he just, yup? And then he, yup. Midoriya is scary, said Present Mike as he and Detective Naomasa talked back and forth. He isn't just scary, my future self, he is batshit terrifying, Present Mike said seriously as many agreed with him. To their side, Snipe and Cementos, who turned to each other, did you see how Miss Jiro almost got to asking if Midoriya was the Batman? Cementos nodded. I did. I wonder how she will react when it's confirmed. The cowboy landed back and rested his head on his palm as he watched the screen. Don't know, but I bet $5 it won't be a nice reveal. Don't you mean yen? I said what I said, responded Snipe. Why did you say dollars instead of yen? It's worth more than yen, was the simple answer they got from their teacher. A little bit behind those two was Rumi, who was wrapped in Aizawa's scarf and some metal bands that were keeping her from running out of the observation room and to the exam to jump Izuku's bones. The rabbit woman licked her lips. Let me go, you sleep-derived Izuku wannabe, shouted the heroine. You know now that you mention it, Midnight said with a smirk on her face. Don't you dare finish that sentence, Aizawa warned his longtime friend. The eyebrow of Aizawa twitched at that last remark. Relax, you horn-ass rabbit, you can have intercourse with Midoriya once this is over, so calm the fuck down before you go and ruin the exam. Rumi glared with her eyes shining dangerously and gritted her teeth. Fine, but I don't care if he gets injured during the I am fucking him. The eraser hero closed his eyes and felt his blood pressure rising. That's fine by me, just make sure to calm down, Ryukyu, while you're at it. God, why do you have to be so cruel to me? Mineta whined out first, Mariko then Ryukyu, and possibly Midnight. He was weeping and wishing he was Midoriya as Rumi drop-kicked him into the ground. Rumi tilted her head at this before turning to see her best friend being restrained with twice as many iron bands, and was physically bending them by the second as she struggled against them. Damn, guess I ain't the only horny one. You have to admit that when he did that, it was incredibly hot, Ryuko said as her friend agreed to that. Aizawa rolled his eyes and released her from his capture tool, and the clampedon bands were undone and returned to her chair. You can say that for all of the women, minus the HPSC president and recovery girl. Rumi looked at the other women, girls, and saw them in different states and kinds of lust. The pussycats were transfixed on the live feed. May and Melissa were writing furiously into a notebook titled, Midoriya Fantasies Volume 3 Feet, and finally, Midnight. The said teenagers blushed brightly at what they had written in the other two novels as David looked at his daughter. Is there something I should know, Melissa? He asked with a quirked eyebrow as his daughter's face turned a flaming red with how hard she was blushing. Inod Dad, she said with a large stutter, getting amused laughter from her dad and her uncle, Might. The purple-haired woman was breathing heavily, her quirk was slowly sweeping out of her, and drool was dripping from her mouth and onto her costume, causing the white material to become almost transparent. The fuck? Was all Rumi could think as she looked at the R-rated heroine. While Aizawa sighed, seeing his longtime friend lying after his student. Mineta went back to drooling as the saliva was making her suit even more revealing, as Mineta intended to soak in the moment. After Izuku hacks into Riddler's bombs. That does it. Izuku Midoriya was badass and incredibly competent, and put most rookie heroes in their first couple of years to shame. That was what the people in the observation room thought after calming down from seeing Izuku get through the Riddler's trap and now actively hunting him. All the pro heroes nodded in agreement with that. Nezu was quiet early, which the HPSA president noticed. Your always joyful smile is gone, Nezu. Why is that? The principal stayed quiet for a few moments before turning his attention to the female president. I'm surprised you haven't pieced it together after all I did say I was going to go all out on him. The HPSA president stared at him before her eyes slowly but surely widened as she figured out what he was getting at. You don't mean. But that shouldn't be possible. What does she mean? Mina asked with confusion. I'm sure we will find out soon, Iida said, gaining a slight idea of what she meant. Next to Nezu Toshinori, who was utterly confused, what are you two talking about? I mean, sure, young Midoriya has shown lots of problem-solving skills so far, but you shouldn't be this shocked at this, so what am I missing? Gran Torino sighed in disbelief. You gotta be kidding me. Is that kid your successor because he has at least 5 times the brains than you do if you can't see how impressive of a feat he just did? Denki just looked as confused as most of the people were. Toshi frowned and analyzed the situation once again. He answered riddles and hacked into the bombs before breaking through the floor and is now changing into the villain. Am I missing something that obvious? The blonde man thought to himself few moments of thinking. Young Midoriya hacked into something of Nezu's design. Midoriya also specifically asked for it not to be easy, meaning Midoriya most likely hacked into a system that was around the same strength as Yue's network. Or it was Yue's system. Holy shit. What was the shout of many people? BBU, that should be impossible, Momo stuttered out in complete shock. Yet Midoriya did it and hacked into a system I designed, Nezu said with a manic smile on his face. I see you made the connection. I have to say, Yaga-san, you got eyes for potential if this is just some of it peeking through, said Nezu. Gran Torino rolled his eyes. He's just lucky the kid thinks so tightly of him and doesn't point out how bad of a teacher he is. A rain cloud formed over Toshino's head as he sulked to himself. I'm not that bad, I've gotten better. The same dark cloud formed above Toshinori's head. The elder hero huffed and turned back to the screen to see Momo tell Izuku to be safe while mentioning his name. He instantly facepalmed and sighed to himself. Meanwhile, Nomori cheered, hell yeah, Momo for the win. The teacher smirked as Momo gained her blush back. Miss Joke raised an eyebrow at the woman who praised her supposed love rival. Aren't you jealous? Shouldn't you be jealous? I mean, that is the guy you're crushing on after all? Nomori leaned into her chair and shrugged. At this rate, he's gonna get the attention of the entire female school and then some, so why fight a losing battle? I instead plan on joining whatever relationship he has at the end of this. Why I did do everything I could, yet the one who is oblivious to women is who gets a harem, Mineta whispered in disdain to himself. The green-haired woman looked at the R-rated hero in bewilderment before turning back to Aizawa. Is she always like this? The hobo teacher sighed. Unfortunate, yes. And the worst part is that wherever she's like this it always works out no matter how bullshit it is. Miss Joke let out a small, huh, before shrugging and snuffling into his side with a soft sigh of relief, and in doing so, Aizawa blushed lightly and wrapped his arm around her and patted her head gently. The teacher also blushed and refused to look at anyone as Emmy smirked in victory. The green-haired woman hummed happily and smiled genuinely at the affection given to her by the man she had sought after for so long. A little ways from them, Mr. Shield and Powerloader were analyzing the equipment Izuku was using, from his hacking device to his cape that allowed him to glide. That device could use some reworking to make it faster and or have a longer range. What do you think? Asked David. Powerloader hummed. I think so too, but I'm not more interested in that case. The fabric is strong yet flexible and can carry his entire weight effortlessly while still being light enough to not get in his way while gliding. David tilted his head at that. The cape is rather fascinating, but what are your thoughts on the car? Well, of course, it could be improved. He made them from scraps, May said with crossed arms at such a potential that the babies had. The support teacher scoffed. Do you even need to ask? That beauty can be improved a lot. But that's the best part. Where to start? Maybe the engine? The tires? Or maybe charging up the chassis entirely and building it from the ground up? David laughed good-heartedly at that. Good point. I can already see some designs I'd love to make if given the chance by Izuku. Powerloader nodded. I'm thinking more tactical in nature, like a tank but on wheels. With an afterburner on the back like this current one? Powerloader smiled mischievously. Hell yeah. The famous BATTANK hopefully on its way winking face. Riddler is apprehended. They watched as the Riddler was cuffed and dragged off. The room was silent, however, as they watched. Izuku stated that there was more to this. It was only then that Nezu giggled like a child who had been given a new toy. As expected of you, Midoriya, the games are not over, and you know that. But can you discover the last riddle's answer in time is the real question, said the rat god. Aizawa looked at the principal in side discomfort. Nezu, I have a bad feeling about all this. Nezu brushed him off. It's fine. Besides, if anything goes wrong, which it inevitably will. I had participants sign a waiver saying that if anything happens to them, neither the school nor its staff or students will be accountable. Everyone gave the rat god suspicious looks. That makes me worry even more, stated the teacher in visible distress. However, Nezu just shrugged. Then I don't think you'll like what's coming next. The room audibly gasped in unison upon finding out the plan of the Riddler. To blow up the seawall and flood the city was a horrific thought, but to see the explosions and the water flooding in first hand through the screens was another thing entirely. Miss Joke, in rage, stood up from her seat, turned, and yelled at the principal, "Are you feekin' crazy?" The heroine nodded in agreement with her future self. Nezu nodded, his smile not leaving his face. I've been diagnosed with mental health problems, yes, but to be fair, so have most heroes. Aioi. Is that true? She turned to Recovery Girl, who nodded but didn't take her glare off of Nezu. You know that makes so much more sense, Denki said as many nodded. Miss Joke fell back into her chair and grasped Aizawa's hand in seek of comfort. The raven-haired teacher returned the gesture with a squeeze as he was just as stressed from this new revelation. They weren't the only ones shocked and terrified as Melissa said something that made the others grimace even more. But the communications can't reach the others to want them or help in search and recovery due to the storm. In other words, they will be flying blind through the rest of the man-made disaster. Many frowned as the students looked shocked, as they didn't think of that, which made the situation even worse. The room's atmosphere became more dreary at that, and May added to it solemnly as she tinkered with Izuku's destroyed Batman suit that Nezu had retrieved after it was logged in evidence by the heroes a few hours ago. The future inventor smiled at being able to improve the baby. Not only that, but people are planning to attack the new mayor during her election, and by the looks of it, Izuku is planning on stopping the attack even with the odds against him. Sighing, Aizawa agreed, no matter how you approach it, this is the worst possible scenario that he will be talking into. I don't even think most heroes could turn this around with how bad the situation has become. Unfortunately, that is true, Aizawa said. The room was completely silent after that as they watched on. wondering what Izuku would do next with such bad odds being put in front of him. With Izuku, Batman turned to Kiori and Kendo. I'm heading to the Gotham Square garden to stop the attack, try and evacuate as many as you can. Kendo looked at him in disbelief. How can you keep going? It's over, we lost. Izuku didn't turn to her as he set the Batmobile to go higher ground where the water wouldn't reach it, because if this was a real-life scenario then people would look up to us for hope. If they saw us lose hope like you did just now, then no one would ever feel safe with their lives in our hands. As much as it is natural to lose hope in this situation, the civilians will rely on you, so Izuku is right, Aizawa explained to the students. Once he was done typing into his hacking device, he put it away and finally turned back to address the heroine. So get up, wipe your tears, and get moving. Some people need you out there. The blunt statement caused Kendo to reevaluate how she was acting, and she did exactly what Batman told her to do. She brushed her hand against her eyes to get the tears out of them, and she looked up into his eyes. The said girl smiled at the slight motivational speech he gave her. Okay. Go while we help out where we can. And stay safe out there, Batman. Izuku turned around and opened the window. Now, he took out his grapple gun and was about to level through it, but stopped for a moment and responded, "You to battle fist, and the same goes for you, Kiori-san." The Batman disappeared into the rainy night, leaving the two women to go and help they could in evacuating the civilians, both of them praying that he made it in time. At Gotham Square Garden, the raid team from the Penguin had arrived at the ceremony with enough time to talk to the police and the other team that was already stationed there. Kyoka was alone for the moment and had stopped and leaned against some railing while scoping out the crowd. Kyoka's eyes shifted from person to person. She noticed as she did this that a good number of them weren't actual students, portraying civilians, except for about 30 of them. The main bulk of the crowd were robots used in the exam, which she thought was a strange choice. Until you find out the ending of the exam Nezu had in store, Emi said with crossed arms as the students nodded in agreement. With a sigh, Kyoka thought of Izuku and how she may or may not have met him earlier at the end of the raid on the Iceberg Lounge. Since then, she'd been thinking of him, his smile, his kind words, his nice, perky. The said girl blushed darkly at what her future self was thinking but wouldn't deny that Izuku did have a nice ass. Kyoka called out Momo, who inadvertently caught her best friend Midorti thought. Turning, the punk girl saw Momo run over her. Hey Yao Momo, how was the raid on your end? Momo blushed a little, and she looked down shyly. Well, it went good and I may have mentioned that I knew who the man under the mask of the Batman was straight off his face. The Ravenet smiled lovingly. He said we'd talk after the exam was finished. He also said a good job of recognizing his voice. I still want to know how he found out, Denki said with a pout. Kyoka smiled and hummed at that, and after thinking for a few minutes, she smirked devilishly. And by meeting after the exam, you two are just going to talk, right? Nothing more like, I don't know, making out with them, lushing you up against a wall or something. The girl's face turned a very deep shade of crimson at what her best friend had said. KK Kyoka, cried out Momo in embarrassment and surprise. The punk girl giggled to herself at her friend's reaction. Oh, I got you good. Don't worry, when you have that talk, I'll be there to help you out. We can even confess together to him while we're at it. Momo blushed but didn't say anything as she honestly thought she might need Kyoka there to help her have the courage to confess, and maybe just maybe they could do some of the things from her romantic novels if she was lucky. As Momo was in dreamland, Kyoka flinched. She heard something that sounded like multiple firecrackers going off super far away due to Jax picking it up. It starts, Ectoplasm said with seriousness in his voice. Turning to the entrance of the building, Kyoka saw some commotion going on, and she grabbed Momo's shoulder and turned to face her. Do you have your radio with you? Momo tilted his head and wanted to ask why, but instead answered the question asked her, have it right here. What happened to yours? Kyoka grabbed the radio and responded, gave it to Kaminari to put away in storage since the damn thing malfunctioned due to the rain. She dialed in the radio's dial before speaking into it. Hello Hero HQ, this is Earphone Jack. Has anything been reported that sounded like an explosion going off? Everyone looked forward as they could all basically feel the tension. The vice president of the class tilted her head and scrunched her brow at hearing what her friend had asked. It further scrunched as the radio responded with nothing but static. Kyoka tried a few more times to get in contact with Hero HQ, or anyone for that matter, but had no luck. Momo tried too, but got no reply from anyone. Soon, however, a scream was heard. They both turned to see the entrance doors forced open with water rushing into the building. Their eyes widened, and Momo tapped her earpiece for the heroes stationed around the building, but even that was blocked. Shit, Momo, come with me, we gotta get the mayor and the civilians out of here. The raven-haired girl nodded, and they both ran to the back of the stage, where the new female mayor was yelling at Shinos, "We can't just leave these people." Shinso suppressed an eye roll as he addressed the mayor, "Our priority is getting you out first. Then I and the rest of these people can come and help the civilians." Good job. As much as they might hate it, the situation would get much worse if a new mayor were to die so soon after the last one. Aizawa spoke, especially in front of so many people. He then added as Shinso smiled hopefully at his new teacher, "If he does well enough." The mayor was a slender young woman with short brown hair in a business suit. She narrowed her eyes at what Shinso had said. "And this is why the city needs people to act for everyone, not just those on the top. Everyone is a high priority, not just myself and the other rich or influential people of this city." With that said, she turned around and walked to the stage where the podium and microphone were at. "Excuse me, hello everyone. Excuse me if you would just stop for a moment and listen." Back with the purple-haired detective, he rubbed his temple similarly to a certain insomniac teacher of Class 1A. He soon turned his attention to Kyoka and Momo. "So this is a damn shit show. Could either of you get in contact with anyone at this point?" Momo shook her head, and Kyoka gave a small nope, while popping the P at the end in response. Shinso growled, "Fuck, this is bad. I mean fucking bad," cursed the detective. "You could say that again," Mina said with a frown. Kyoka couldn't help but nod. "Yeah, we're in a terrible situation, and we have no idea what's happening out there. 1 second, everything's fine, and then I hear what I'm guessing now were explosions going off through the city." Shino crossed his arms at that. "Explosions. That sounds like something that Riddler would do to me." Momo begrudgingly agrees. "True, is the Batman said there was more to this exam, and after this, I'm starting to think Riddler had a plan in case of being apprehended, or maybe this was his plan all along." The three were silent until Kyoka heard something, which sounded like clicking and clanging noises from above them. She looked up and squinted her eyes to try and see into the rafters and past the bright lights shining down on them. Her eyes, after a few blinks, rendered movement, and a loud band was heard a second later. "Oh my god, there are people in the rafters," called out Kyoka while Shino ran to get the mayor, who had been shot in the shoulder, and got her behind cover. Momo made a riot shield and ran to Shino's to help him get out and into better cover while tanking rifle fire, leaving Kyoko now see that indeed around 15 men were in the rafters shooting down at them. But just when the situation seemed dire, multiple explosions went off above the rafters and on the glass dome, which was directly over the firing square, which in turn made Shino scream out. "Oh, for fuck's sake, do they have more bombs or something?" Momo, who was looking up as well, shook her head. "No, it's Batman." Everyone smiled at Izuku's arrival. Izuku landed on a rooftop looking at Gotham Square Garden. His eyes scanned the building using his detective vision, and he saw a large group of people arming themselves above the stadium. "Alfred, how are the evacuation efforts going?" He based his AI. "Not good," Iida said with a frown. Alfred answered a second later, "Less than it's slow going, sir, but I calculated that around 20% of the population have been evacuated so far, with the number climbing as the heroes and special services, the seawall collapsing and spilling into the city greater than." Tightening his hands into a fist, Izuku speaks, "Alfred, get in contact with all personnel in Gotham. I don't care if you need to use UA's satellite to get the job done. Notify them of the situation immediately." "Less than ye, sir, I'll start right away greater than." The dark KNGIHT shifted his sight to his utility belt, where his gear was. He estimated he had enough explosives to get through the glass dome, but once that was over, he'd be out of explosives for the rest of the fight. Many had frowned at that as it could be useful for later or use them against the criminals in the plaza. With no other choice, he decided to do just that. Aiming his grappling gun, he shot himself into the air and toward a skyscraper on the other side of the stadium. Disconnecting the line when he was at the appropriate height, the Batman put his grapple gun away and took out his explosives before throwing them below him as he then used his cape to slow his fall. Approximately 5 seconds later, the bombs reached the dome, blowing the glass out and making a big enough hole for him to fall straight through and onto a catwalk above the gunman. Entering like the badass you are, Kirishima, Miriko, and several others yelled out with glee. Izuku quickly took out his remaining batarangs in both of his hands before throwing them at the gunman. Most of the ranged weapons hit their mark, but some of the gunmen moved out of the way just in time, causing the batarangs to embed themselves into the catwalk behind them. The ones who weren't hit turned their attention fully to him and aimed at the Batman, but by then, Izuku was on the move. He jumped from the catwalk to a pillar where he slid down onto the gunman's level. Putting his hand on his belt, the Batman took out some smoke pellets, and when he jumped into their view, he threw them at their feet. Smoke puffed into the air, and Izuku engaged them, ducking under a swing. Izuku kicked the assailant off the railing, with the cord connecting to his harness catching the man and preventing them from falling. Izuku moved to his next opponent, giving them a sucked punch as they appeared out of the smoke, knocking them out in an instant, the assailant's unconscious body hitting the floor a moment later. But out of nowhere, one of the men grabbed Izuku from behind, and with Izuku's luck, another man came out of the smoke and saw him being held there. The man's fist lit up with a fireball, and they threw it directly at Izuku, not even caring about the alley. It impacted Izuku in the chest, sending him and the man who was holding him flying off the jumbotron they were standing atop of. Nice job in quickly immobilizing them, Cemento said with the heroes nodding in agreement. With Kyoka, as soon as Batman entered the scene, Kyoka turned to the female Ravenet beside her. Momo, we need to help him. Momo looked up from her seated position, applying pressure to the mayor's gunshot wound while making medical supplies using her quirk. As much as she probably wants to help you, it wouldn't be wise for Momo to join you, Jiro, Iida said with a small frown on his face. I can't help up there due to needing to stay and aid the injured, but you can take Shino and some officers and get up there if you can. Panic filled Kyoka, but steeled herself and looked to Shino, who cocked his gun and gave her a nod. In return, Kyoka nodded back and said a sort of goodbye before running over to some police and firefighters. Hey, how do we get up there? She yelled to a stagehand who was talking to one of the firefighters. One of the firefighters who was speaking to the man pointed to a ladder not too far from the man. You'll need to climb that ladder and navigate the catwalks, ma'am. In an instant, Kyoka leapt from the back of the stage and into the knee-high was. Shino wasn't far behind as he ordered a few of the officers to follow. Kyoka, the entire time, was thinking about Izuku. Hold on, just a bit longer, Izuku, I swear if you get hurt, I'm gonna. Just please be safe. Jiro nodded with her future self and hoped that Izuku was still safe-ish. Back with Izuku, Izuku got out of the man's gold mid-flight and used his grapple gun to save himself from falling a 50-foot drop below into the crowd, but in doing so at such speed caused his shoulder to pop out of place. Ah, he cried out. He was able to hold on and get to a higher catwalk, but she groaned in pain as his shoulder shot painful waves of agony through his body. In a knee-jerk reaction, Izuku grabbed his shoulder and pushed it back into place with a sickening pop, just as painful as when it was dislocated. Many winced in sympathy at that, especially Aizawa. Popping a shoulder out of place is not fun. Gritting his teeth, Izuku wasn't taking any chances. He used his EMP devices in stun mode, turning them into mini electric mines that detonated on his command. He threw the devices at the gunmen who were still standing in the smoke, and when they reached their targets, activated them. Shouts of pain were heard next, as most were out of the fight from being electrified. So far so good, Melissa couldn't help but think as Midoriya was doing pretty well. One of the men, however, was seemingly unaffected by the electricity due to his weak electric quirk, and in an act of genius, used his brain and jumped to a catwalk where Izuku had thrown his batarangs earlier in the beginning of the fight. The man then took out his gun, a double-barrel shotgun, and aimed it at the wires holding up the jumbotron that Izuku and the unconscious men were on. The masked thug shot the wires twice, causing the large metal frame to drop halfway, with only a few wires left holding it in the air. Luckily for the unconscious men, They were strapped into harnesses that caught them in case they fell. Izuku wasn't as lucky, so he slid off but was just able to grab onto the edge in the very last second. Izuku was dangling there with only one hand on the ledge, and he tried to reach it with his other hand to pull himself up, but was stripped by pain as that arm was the one that was previously dislocated. Unable to get up this way, the Batman painfully reached for his grappling gun. When he grasped it, he aimed it up into the rafters of the ceiling and shot it. He switched hands mid-air to his non-dislocated arm and got out just in time, as the man from before had reloaded and shot twice at where Izuku previously was standing. Even though he missed, that didn't stop the gunman from reloading and trying again. The Batman landed on an iron beam and ran across it, avoiding another 2 shots. This was a mistake on the gunman's part because Batman was now able to jump from the beam and lounge across the gap between them. Everyone watched the scene in a tense silence. In a split second, however, the gunman loaded a shell into his gun and aimed it at Izuku's stomach when he was barely over a foot away from him. Bang! Izuku missed the gunman due to this and hit the tailing behind him. The bullet wound may have been fake, but the special bullets hurt like the real things, causing Izuku to falter in getting up. Thinking he had the upper hand, the gunman slowly and carefully loaded 2 shells before approaching the Batman. Taking a robotic sound and a deep breath, the android aimed its weapon directly at Izuku's exploded lower face. Tilting his head up, the Batman looked right into its eyes with no fear. He just looked up at the android emotionless, but also with a spark of cunning in his eyes. "You're not gonna shoot me," the Batman said simply as if it was a fact. The gunman, however, tilted his head. "And why is that?" Izuku's gaze went to his side, and he smirked, "Because she won't let you." Recoiling a little at that remark, the gunman ran his head around to the bottom of a boot, slamming into his face and kicking him from the catwalk and causing the android to drop his gun. This boot belonged to none other than Kyoka Jiro, aka Earphone Jack. Jiro smirked at this as many smiled that the fight was going to be over soon. "Don't you dare touch him, you fucker," cursed the perplet. She turned to Izuku and set a watery smile on him. Izuku returned it with a smile of his own. "Good to see you, Kyoka," said Izuku while slowly pushing himself up. "Idiot," she mumbled to herself as many of the girls couldn't help but agree with her. The punk-dressed girl didn't respond as she fell to her knees by his side and hugged him tightly. The tears in her eyes started to fall as she touched the spot where he had been shot. Izuku had been to lose to the gun thing, and the exam bullet pierced his suit fully and went into his body, causing blood to flow down from his abdomen. "Why, you reckless, handsome idiot," she just barely was able to sob out while her hands clutched onto him. The Batman smiled melancholically at her and raised his hand, the hand attached to the shoulder that wasn't dislocated, and rested it on her chin because he honestly didn't know if he could use his other one anymore. He slowly lifted her head so her face was directed at him, and he leaned in, pressing his lips against hers in a gentle gesture of comfort and love. The kiss was warm and gentle, successfully calming Kyoka down and making her sadness slip away to be replaced by love and affection. The two didn't even address Shinso and the few police officers who arrived a minute later. The said girl blushed darkly as the other girls interested in Izuku had a very large jealous aura around them, that Jiro stole Izuku's first kiss, and that it wasn't with them. They eventually broke the kiss and leaned back, their eyes locked in a heated exchange, but as they say, all good things must come to an end, and this end came from the purple-haired detective. "So, you two are done because we got bigger problems on our hands and need all hands on deck," said Shinso, feeling super awkward and like a third wheel. The teenager blushed darkly at having to see that as being a third wheel sucked. Kyoka blushed while Izuku just smiled at he, making her blush intensify. With her help, Izuku stood up and leaned against the railing. His eyes dropped to his bleeding wound. With a grimace, he reached into his utility before grabbing a pair of tweezers. He then used his other hand to use his detective vision and looked to see where the bullet had hit. Gritting his teeth, the Batman used the tweezers to extract the bullet from the wound. It wasn't that deep, so a stitch or two would do the job, but for now, he used a small bottle of alcohol disinfectant and a bandage from his utility belt to cover and keep the wound clean. Shinos, Kyoka, and the police officers who saw all of this went as pale as ghosts. One of the officers even puked into the long drop below them with his buddy patting his back awkwardly. Many of the students also turned pale white at this, and many pro-heroes flinched at seeing this. Izuku, after his impromptu patch job, stood to his full height and addressed Shino, "Get these men down and cuff them, we have to help with the evacuation, and I don't want them getting away." At that, Kyoka's eyes widened. "Is Batman, you're injured and need to rest after all you've been through today." The Batman looked at her and sighed, "I can't rest, not when I have a job to do." "I hate this side of him," Taisu said as everyone agreed with him at this. Kyoka tried to retort but was cut off by a loud crashing sound. They all turned to see the back of the stadium's rear entrance being broken through by a police car as a giant wave of water came crashing along with tons of debris. "Oh my God," said one of the officers at the site. They watched transfixed as the police car barreled itself through a metal structure that was covered in lights for the stage. The police car pushed right through it and the structure fell over onto the top part of the stage, causing it to collapse on top of the people on the stage, which was starting to submerged in water. A power line connected to the light was now torn and dangling, an electrified line that swayed side to side above a panicked crowd of actual students playing civilians dangerously close to electrocuting them all. Izuku's eyes widened at seeing this, and he looked up toward the source of the line powering the cable to see an electric box that was malfunctioning and sparking everywhere. His mind raced with possible solutions, and he glanced at his belt for a tool for the job, but found a horrific sight. Just about everyone's eyes had widened at this. He was out of gear, his batarangs had been used up, and his explosives and even EMPs were also out, leaving him with nothing to use in this situation. But then his eyes went to his gauntlets, the 3 sharp blades that he added to them to grab and break blades. They could work. Although there was only one way he could sue them, he'd have to cut that electric wire up close. "He isn't," Mina asked them with tears in her eyes. "He is," Uraraka said with a sigh. Tilting his head, he looked upon the woman as if feeling his resolve grow. Kyoka grabbed his hand, he turned her, and looked her in the eye. "I gotta do this." Kyoka's sad face met his own. "I know, but that doesn't stop me from hating it." With a small peck on his cheek, Kyoka let him go, taking a step back as Izuku leapt into action. In the observation room, the room was quiet. They had watched Izuku beat the gunman, but had sustained heavy injuries, from his shoulder popping out to begin the actual shot. And now, by the looks of things, he was going to do something even crazier than that, and this time, the women who were attracted to him were genuinely scared for him and visibly concerned. The 7 girls all nodded in agreement with her future self. Aizawa turned to Nezu. "Pull the plug on the exam, Nezu, this is going too far, people could get hurt or killed." The principal stated, causing the entire room to look at him, and they saw it gleam in his eye, but his smile was gone. This surprised them, but not as much as what he said next. "The exam will continue. I have faith in Midoriya, and you should too." "He is insane," all the students thought in shock that their principal was letting it continue. Hound Dog stood up at this. He had been quiet for most of the exam until now. "Nezu, you can't be serious." "Sure, he has done great so far, but we can't risk the lives of our students like this." Nezu finally took his eyes off the screen to look directly into Hound Dog's eyes. "I'm dead serious, and they will be safe. Just watch and you'll see." "Just what do you think will happen?" Recovery Girl and Miriko thought to themselves and eyed the principal warily. The principal gestures to the screen to see Izuku telling Kyoka something. The camera mics pick it up along with Kyoka's response, making the room silent once again. Rumi covered her mouth in horror, her usual personality gone as it was replaced with fear for Izuku. He's going to. Yes, he will." The one to speak this time was Toshinori, who looked at the screen with a sad smile, his eyes watching his successor proudly and with understanding. "He's going to sacrifice himself, so others will be safe. That's just the type of man he is, the same type of man I saw when I first met him." Chio glared at the screen showing Izuku before turning a furious glare at Toshinori. "This is all your fault, you blonde moron," she yelled as she jabbed her cane into his chest as he shrunk back into the chair. Recovery Girl gripped her cane tightly. "But at what cost? That suit won't protect him enough. He may be critically injured or worse." Toshinori turned to face him. "Like Nezu said, have faith in him. He just might surprise you, Chio-san." With that said, He turned back and watched on at the brave young man on screen, and after some thinking, the others begrudgingly did the same. With the Batman, Izuku took out his grapple gun and shot it into the ceiling before swinging off and towards the power line. At the end of his swing, he caught the wire and disengaged his grapple gun before putting it back into his utility belt. Breathing deeply, Izuku looked at Kyoka and smiled. She returned it with a sad expression, and then, without hesitation, Izuku put the wire in between the gauntlet's blades before pulling with all his might. All Might smiled sadly at his successor. The wire was cut, but in doing so, a surge of electricity coursed through him and shocked him into semi-unconsciousness. His body dropped from the disconnected wire and fell into the water below, with a mighty splash. His body sank into the water, cushioning his fall. Kyoka, Shinos, and the police leaned over the edge of the railing and watched the entire thing. The punk girl recoiled and covered her mouth with tears streaming from her eyes. The students and androids in the stadium had all watched as well, some horrified while others were slightly grateful for Batman's action, but also saddened. "Ooh, oh no," said the detective as the Batman didn't submerge. He and the others quickly started thinking that the Batman had died. Everyone's eyes widened with shock as they prayed that he was still fine. As half a minute passed, Izuku's body sank deeper into the water. The liquid did its job of cushioning his fall, but that didn't mean he didn't feel it. The wind had gotten knocked out of him, and the small burns he had sustained from the electricity arced on contact with the water, and he was barely holding on to consciousness as he was slowly drowning. He only had one option left with his body banged up. His left hand slowly and painfully moved toward his belt and undid the latch on a long pouch. Fighting through the excruciating pain he was in, took out a cylindrical item. This was a prototype adrenaline shot he had come up with in case of a quirk like Nemuri's, but it would also help if he were in a dangerous situation like this. Thank God, Chio said in relief that he had something like that, as did many others. His thumb popped the cap of the injector off, and he soon injected it into his thigh. Slowly, the medicine did its job, and his body started up again, and right in time, too, because his lungs were screaming for oxygen. Pushing off the floor, Izuku's face broke the water's surface, allowing him to breathe, the oxygen going into his lungs feeling like heaven as he soon regained some of his strength. Pushing through the water, he got to some higher ground, making the water go from his lower waist down to his high thigh level. The Batman, after collecting himself, looked around and noticed his surroundings. More than a few people closed their eyes and let out a sigh of relief. The police cruiser from earlier had tipped over, and the lights were mostly broken, with only one red light still spinning under the water. On the other side where the stage was set, the people who were stuck under the metal structure were still stuck and would drown soon without any aid. Thinking quickly, Izuku took out an emergency flare from his belt and lit it. The red light illuminated the dark as Izuku started his stride toward the trapped people. While this was happening up on the catwalk, Kyoka sobbed a happy cry at seeing her love alive. She then ran to the ladder they came up from and climbed down in a rush to help him. Shinos decided to stay up in the rafters and help the officers in apprehending the gunmen who were still unconscious, but he gave one look of appreciation towards Batman for his heroic act. Many smiled as a few had a couple of tears come out of their eyes. The Batman strides through the water and climbs some fallen debris to get to the people. Stuck, he pushed a large pillar of structured metal pipes to reach the. Izuku then looked at the frightened faces of the civilians, police, and politicians. The Batman reached his unoccupied hand out for the mayor, who was in front with bandages on her shoulder. Her scared haze was on him, and Izuku could tell she was frightened. But just when he was about to speak, Momo moved through the water. She had to have a butterfly band-aid on her temple with some real blood stains showing through it. She had been hurt when the light structure fell on them. Her hand grabbed his own, and then Izuku pulled her up and out of the water, and she hugged him before getting up and offering help as well. After that, a young android boy and the rest started accepting his and Momo's help. Some police even started going to their location and helping him evacuate the people. Many sighed that the exam was finally over. The structure eventually collapsed fully onto the stage, but by then, Izuku, with help, got everyone out from under it. Once they were safe, Batman turned and stepped into the water that was now up to his chest. He moved, and the other followed after him, and with the help of Kyoka, Momo, and the police, they guided the people up to the roof of the stadium, where the other heroes could be seen helping people outside the stadium. The observation room. Yes, he did it, cheered Rumi with tear stains visible on her face. Ryuko wiped her own eyes as she nodded with a smile. He's alive and he did it. Behind them Recovery Girl let out a sigh of relief and spoke to Toshinori. You were right, but next time, you support him purposely putting himself in danger will hurt you. The retired #1 hero sweat dropped as he replied, to understand. A few chuckled at that. You better, said Chio before leaning back into her seat while the rest of the room cheered Izuku and the others on. I don't doubt that Midoriya is a special young man, but he will have to keep in mind his safety. After all, it's not just his mother will be saddened if anything happens to him. There are now all these young women who value him, thought the elderly heroine. Every girl who was interested in the boy had blushed darkly. Her widened eyes washed over the girls in the observation room, each having faces full of glee at the sight of the man they cared for being alive and somewhat okay. Time skip. The heroes, along with the police, had been evacuating since last night, the Gotham Square Garden building having been used as a shelter due to how large the roof was and how easy it was to get civilians to it by using the heroes' quirks. Most of the city population, minus the already evacuated, were there using helicopters to airlift the injured and the remaining residents using boats to get out of the city or to the main road leading to Ua proper, where buses were waiting for them. They were all sitting, waiting for the tuners to be airlifted or boated off, but near the very back of the crowd walked a figure. It was the Batman, who was holding a female student who had been injured during the last part of the exam, her arm having a large gash on it. The Batman carried the young lady while the civilians surrounding them turned and gazed at them. They watched the vigilante and the hero of the exam walk to the Coast Guards, ready to airlift the injured. Yes, Midoriya is the hero of the exam, Kendo said with a smile on her face. The Batman walked through the crowds with a sense of purpose, a sense that he had felt very only a few times. This feeling was the same as the time he saved Bakugo from the sludge villain, when he saved Uraraka from Zero Pointer, Sue from Shigaraki, and most recently when he saved Kota from Muscular. He understood what this was. He was where he belonged. The hero who had always been inside of him knew that this right here was what he was meant for, what he was destined for. Many frowned at this, especially Kota. I still hate that Midoriya had to fight such a villain, Aizawa thought to himself. Izuku Midoriya, for better or for worse, couldn't be Deku, the hero student who always wore a semi-fake smile. He needed to be something more, something greater. He laid the young woman down on the medical board, but before the Coast Guard could strap her in, she grabbed onto Izuku's hand with a pleading look. Izuku looked at her hand when he shifted his gaze to her face. It's going to be all right, I got you. He put his other hand over hers in a sign of comfort. Her eyes misted up as she nodded with a newfound spark in her eyes, a spark he knew as hope. The Batman took a step back as the student was lifted off the ground slowly and taken inside the helicopter. They soon flew off in the direction of Ual, leaving Izuku to stare up at them flying off into the distance. After a moment, Izuku reached up towards his cow. The exam was finished now. He had no reason to hide who he was, and it wasn't like they'd recognize him with his makeup and contacts, so it was fine. Useful especially for infiltration, Aizawa mumbled to himself as several other people who heard him nodded in agreement. He had found his purpose, his goal. It was set in front of him now, and he was fully ready to take it heard, no matter the outcome. He gripped his cowl and pulled it back, letting his crushed, cut up, and roughed up face free while thinking to himself. I've become something I could only dream of. I am now more than a tool of my ambitions. I'm here for the people, for the shunned and unspoken, a symbol of something greater than just myself. I am the Batman. Izuku stood looking out into the flooded city of Gotham, his cowl pulled back, allowing his face to be free, the cuts from coming in contact with fresh salty air. The exam was over. He had finished what he came to this city to do, with his new goal set, and now all he had to do was chase it. While Izuku was in the moment, someone came up from behind him. This was the leader of the hero students, Itsuka Kendo, or if you were going by her hero name, you would call her Battle Fist. Batman, the last of the boats has arrived and is about to take the rest of the civilians. The rest of the heroes, and myself are going with them. I was wondering if you'd join us. The Batman didn't turn to address her as he answered, I have some stuff to do first, but if I'm quick enough in packing my things, I'll meet you at the bridge if I can. He's going to pack his stuff, isn't he? Shoji asked. Most likely, Momo responded to her classmate. Kendo nodded to this. A part of her wanted to take a peek at his exploded face, but she willed herself not to. All right, if we don't meet you there, I just wanted to say it was an honor fighting alongside you. Many nodded, agreeing that they would try to find out, but due to him, during the majority of the work, they wouldn't probably do it. Izuku smiled at this. I can say the same to you, Battle Fist. The red-headed girl blushed a little and smiled in return. Well, this is goodbye, Batman. I'll see you later. She turned and walked away as Izuku said goodbye to her as well. Once she was a fair distance away, Izuku pulled down his cowl and took out his grapple gun. He shot it at a tall building and left the rooftop while others watched on in fascination. While Izuku went to the Batmobile, the civilians and other personnel helping with the evacuation corded boats that would take them to the bridge leading out of the city. Many smiled beyond happy that they were finally done with this exam. Izuku, 5 minutes of using his grapple gun and his cape to glide, arrived at where the Batmobile had parked to avoid the flood. It was an overhanging bridge that was near a shortcut to the Batcave. He landed on the roof of the Batmobile, which was mostly in good condition, besides a few scrapes and scratches on the paint here and there from the autopilot swirling through vehicles. He would have to upgrade that in the future. Oh, don't worry, we will vastly improve your gear, Power Loader said with a large grin on his face. Now that's cool, Ryuko said with a smile as her best friend nodded in agreement with how much of a badass Izuku looked to her. But besides that, he was content with its conditions since those could be buffed out later. Without delay, Izuku entered the Batmobile and turned on the engine, causing it to roar to life. Driving off, the wheels skidded on the still damp road. He went down a wide alley and into an abandoned garage with a click of a button, where a tunnel would take him down to the old train system. From here, he navigated his way to the Batcave. It took him 10 minutes before he arrived at the untouched station. The water had not gotten to it due to the way it was built to withstand a flood like the one the city had gone through. Izuku connected that Nezu designed it this way purposely for that very reason. But enough of that. Izuku exited his car and stripped out of his dirty and damaged suit before getting into some street clothes. He then went through packing his belongings and storing the Batcomputer in some of the crates that they came in. This process took him about an hour of work, but he eventually got it all packed and strapped to the top of the Batmobile. But before leaving, he had one last pass through the place he called home for the past couple of days. Man, this was such a cool place, Denki said with a slight pout, getting many nods of agreement. He walked through the bedroom area where he slept, the arsenal area that used to hold his gear, where the Batcomputer and Batmobile had been placed previously. His memories of the exam, however short it was, were all valuable in making him who he was now. They made him realize the hero he needed to be for himself and not the hero he believed he needed to be for others, and his past trauma. Several people frowned at this. The hero he originally wanted to be was a copy, a bastardized version of his mentor, All Might. But now, he would be his hero, the Batman, a caped crusader who would take action needed for the good of the world, while not letting the minority suffer. All Might smiled that he had finally found the hero he wanted to be and wasn't copying him anymore. With his nostalgic moment finished, he turned and walked to his car, and right as he grabbed the handle of the Batmobile, he heard a screech. Tilting his head around, he saw a small black shadow moving through the air. On closer inspection, it was a rather large bat. Izuku smiled upon seeing it and shook his head with his eyes closed at the irony. The door to the Batmobile opened, and Izuku entered with a sigh of relief. His hands gripped the wheel while the tires screamed out as the car peeled out and flew down the tunnel leading towards the bridge to enter Gotham. Leaving the bat to screech and perch on the ceiling, looking directly at where Izuku had left, its red eyes gleaming in the lights of the cave. Now that has to be some kind of real foreshadowing, Momo said with crossed arms. Definitely, many had said at the same time. In the observation room, a big sigh left the lips of Aizawa. Seeing the exam finally concluded, the recovery girl had left a long time ago to help with any wounded, and so far, the count was 47 injured, with minor injuries, with no serious injuries being reported. Thank God, Chiyo said with a sigh of relief before furiously glaring at Nezu. The raven-haired teacher combed through Emi Fukudato's hair. This was the real name of the heroine, Miss Joke, and Aizawa was a little confused about how he felt about her. The two had gotten closer due to the exam, and Aizawa was genuinely thinking of asking her out on a date. With how things had gone so far, sure, she was annoying at times, but he didn't dislike that about her due to her cute side. Emi was sleeping and snuggled into his side, her face buried in his neck as she slept. Aizawa had a small smile form as he basked in her presence and made his decision to ask her out. Aizawa blushed darkly at this. But the warm atmosphere had to end as Present Mike walked towards him. Yo, Aizawa, we gotta get to the auditorium and set up the debrief for the exam. The Ravenette's face scrunched into a glare as he looked at one of his longtime friends, but he relented. Fine, let me wake up Joke, and we'll meet you there. Smirking at his gruff best friend, Mike nodded. Sure thing, but don't spend too much time cuddling with her or you'll miss the debrief. Aizawa's eye twitched and he let out a sigh. Mike, the debrief is in 2 hours. I'm not going to miss it, so stop messing around and fuck off. Mike chuckled to himself and bowed. As you command, Coffee King, and may you and Mrs. Coffee Queen have a wonderful time. The two heroes blushed at this while Emi was happy she finally got her man. Throwing a pen hitting Mike in the forehead, Aizawa growled but made sure not to raise his voice. Get out of here already, you damn blonde. Rubbing his forehead with a frown, Mike begrudgingly left, mumbling about coffee addicts and their tempers when it comes to ruining his fun. This is why you should never get with an annoying blonde, Aizawa said seriously. This left Aizawa and Emi alone, and after waiting for Mike to be fully gone, he leaned his head into Emi. The heroic teacher whispered, you know I can tell you've been awake for the past 10 minutes, right? Miss Joke opened her eyes and looked up at him lovingly. Oh, I know, but that didn't stop you from running your fingers through my hair, now did it? Smiling at the man she cherished, Emi leaned in and gave him a peck on the cheek. I expect you to pick me up at 6:30 tomorrow when you get off work. I'll be at the front desk of my agency waiting for you. He looked at her with a quirked brow. And what exactly do you have in mind? Emi rolled her eyes but responded with an amused smile. You're taking me on a date to a cat cafe a couple of minutes walk from my agency, and you don't need to dress up. I'll be in my civilian clothes, so you don't need to dress up all fancy. Keeping quiet for a few seconds, Aizawa nodded. I'll be there. Do you wanna go to the debrief of the exam? Emi smiled and kissed his cheek a second time. Sure sounds fun. The two stood up and walked out of the train tunnel with their hands locked together, neither noticing the lipstick on Aizawa's cheek. Mina and Toru squalled loudly at that and were about to say something until Aizawa interrupted them. If either of you opens your mouths, it's detention for 3 months, he said seriously as both teenagers quickly shut up. Time skip. The debrief had been pushed back a few hours more due to all the preparations the teacher had to do and the request from Recovery Girl to let the injured students participate after being healed. This worked better because by the time Izuku got back to the bridge he drove along, having missed the buses and was going to unpack his belongings. He drove to the private garage where he made his equipment in for the exam given to him by Nezu and unpacked everything before going and getting some treatment from Recovery Girl, who wasn't too pleased with him. One scolding and a healing kiss later, and Izuku was out like a light, his exhaustion finally catching up with him and making him sleep for about 3 hours. Of course, Chiyo sighed out at her most visited patient. When he woke up, he had 10 minutes left until the debrief. Izuku shifted and sat up out of the bed to be met by the gaze of the principal, who was sitting at the side of his bed with a large briefcase. Hello Midoriya, I have come to congratulate you on your performance during the exam. You knocked my expectations out of the park, and I'm not the only one who thinks this. The principal smiled widely. Izuku smiled sincerely at the chimera. Thank you, sir, but I still need a lot more experience in the field before I accept such high remarks from you or anyone else. Smiling his usual creepy smile, Nezu nodded. I agree full-heartedly, but I'll get into that later. For now, I have a present from your support technician, Hatsume, and a few friends of yours. Gesturing to the case, Izuku raised an eyebrow and looked back and forth between it and the principal. After a reassuring nod, Izuku picked up the case and placed it on the bed. His thumbs undid the latches, and he opened it fully to show it a contest. Izuku's eyes widened at its contents before turning his head towards Nezu in disbelief. Why did his eyes widen? Denki asked, confused, as Many sighed. It most likely has his first suit in it, Melissa explained to him. Nezu continued to smile as he explained, I had Ectoplasm retrieve your damaged suit from the police evidence locker and gave it to Hatsume and the daughter of Davy Shield. They both worked on fixing it up while you helped vacate the people through the end of the exam and finished it up an hour ago. Izuku couldn't help but smile widely at that. His eyes scanned over the completely repaired suit and the note on top of it. He picked up the note and read it himself, his smile never disappearing as the more he read, the more grateful it made him feel. I knew it, the daughter of David said with a smile. Hey there, Muscles, it's May Hatasume. Oh, also Melissa Shield is here too. We worked on your baby and fixed it up for you. Gotta say it's a work of art, but with tons of improvements to be made in the future. Have you ever thought of adding sharp claws to the gloves? Shield is yelling at me for asking that, but whatever, I guess. Come to the support course and we'll make babies together, all three of us. Shield passed out for some reason, so I guess that's the end of this letter. Hope you aren't hurting from your injuries, I'll probably make something to help with that in the future. Anyways, this is goodbye, love May Hatsume of Hatasume Inc. and Melissa Shield, my new assistant. Melissa blushed deeply at the thought of having Izuku's kids and made it worse with how May worded her letter. He chuckled at May's over-the-top personality and put the letter down after folding it back up. His eyes went to the suit, and he turned the chimera. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say you want me to come to the debrief dressed in my vigilante suit for dramatic flair. Nezu nodded gleefully. You know me so well, Midoriya, that's exactly why I brought it. I'll leave you to get dressed, and we'll go to the auditorium together. Many of the teachers sighed in exasperation at their principal. Pushing himself off the chair, he exited through the curtain around his bed and allowed Izuku to change in peace. Izuku shook his head half-heartedly at the principal's antics and got dressed. The suit was just as he had it before, with a few minor alterations. The gauntlets had the 3 small blades that his prototype suit had, and there was new armor in his thighs that wasn't there before. He didn't mind the changes as they didn't interfere with movement and were adjustments he would have made eventually, and after moving his arms, he found that the armor had been changed slightly, as it was lighter than before. Good idea, David said with a nod of approval. Most likely, May or Melissa switched up the alloy used to forge the chest plate and other pieces of previously damaged armor. They still felt strong, but he'd have to ask what they used to make sure it was up to his standards. After making sure he had all of the gear strapped securely, he nodded to himself and pulled back the curtain to reveal the principal and recovery girl waiting for him. Chio huffed at the sight of her most visited patient. Good to see you're wearing something to protect yourself. God forbid you continue wearing that fabric that gave you no protection against villains. The woman nodded in agreement with her future self. Izuku's sweat dropped. I understand where you're coming from, but that was strong, tear-resistant fabric. It's not my fault OFA shreds through most material. Recovery girl hummed in thought for a moment before sighing and responding, that's true, but I'd like it if all heroic students wore such protective suits. It sure would help when your hero students get scrapes and bruises and come running for me to heal you. Apparently, knee and elbow pads don't exist anymore. Chio grumbled at that, like why can't heroes nowadays wear any protection aside from what their quirks give them. She said the last part sarcastically, and it made Izuku think of his classmates' suits, and to be honest, she was onto something, especially some of his female classmates like Momo, who had zero protection and was wearing a sexy bikini. Momo stuttered out in embarrassment as her face turned bright red, along with many of the other girls in 1A. You're not wrong, I'll probably have to talk with some of my classmates about upgrading their costumes. I have a few designs drawn already that might help convince them to get better costumes that cover their weak points. Nezu raised an eyebrow at this. Oh, you'll have to show me some of those designs, they would be interesting to see, and I'd gladly make a class presentation where I go over your classmates' current costumes, weaknesses and your better designs for them. Nezu hummed in thought about what his costume upgrades for his classmates would look like, and the classmates of Izuku were also curious about what he had in mind. Izuku smiles proudly. Of course, sir. Off to the side, Chio thought to herself, hopefully those two get them to change their costumes. Whoever thought going with costume ideas based on comic books was an utter idiot. There's a big difference between what's alright in comics and the real world. Again Chio nodded in agreement with her future self. With that all said and done, the three of them walked out of the nurse's office and towards the auditorium. While they walked, Nezu led Izuku in on some news. They were in the courtyard when Nezu piped up. "Ah, I almost forgot to mention this, Midoriya, but some of the students were able to record and post some of you and your interaction with the Riddler during the exam, and even got the last part of the exam in the stadium as well." Izuku stopped walking and looked at Nezu with a surprised expression. "How?" Nezu turned and answered, "From what I gathered, a student was live streaming through the exam. They just so happened to be near a store with TVs in front that caught your first encounter with the Riddler and some of the other footage of you. From there the streamer continued to update and eventually recorded your saving of the commissioner and the stadium's situation due to fans requesting to see you in action." Many hummed at that. The tall teen sighed to himself, but honestly didn't care. He only wondered how the public reacted to his role as Batman and his escapades. And seeing the unasked question, Nezu spoke. "So far, the public has been talking highly of you, even if you were a vigilante in the exam. They think you did well with your role, and look forward to UA's response to their inquiry on you." Izuku narrowed his eyes, feeling there was more to be said. "But that's not all, is there?" Nezu smiled at that. Nezu smiled at his promising student. "I knew you'd catch on. Yes, there is more. Some vigilantes at large have been posting some things on the dark web about you, but here's the strange thing. They all are praying for your efforts and tactics, some even think you are a vigilante doing me a favor." Now that was not what Izuku expected. For one, there were vigilantes on the dark web. What did they do, post selfies with beat-up criminals? And secondly, they thought highly of him. That was a little too much of Izuku at this time, so he'd have to shell that for later. Many snickered at that, and Aizawa and a few others sighed, knowing some vigilantes did do that. Letting out a deep sigh, Izuku responded as they started walking again. "As strange as that is, I don't think I have the mental capacity right now to deal with or digest the tidbit of information." Snorting, the elderly heroine piped up, "That's gotta be the smartest thing you've said in the entire time I've known you." Izuku's sweat dropped. "I'm not Toshinori-sensei. I'm not that idiotic when it comes to understanding myself and my limitations. I do, however, ignore those limitations when needed in rough situations." All Might was slightly flushed at that, getting several laughs from people around him. Recovery Girl fumbled at that, and Izuku could hear a faint, "He's just like that blonde buffoon, he nearly dresses up his words better." By then, however, they had reached the back entrance to the auditorium, and entering through the back door, they saw some of the staff behind the curtain of the stage. Izuku noted that there were more people than he expected, with some he didn't think would be there, like the Pussycat and Koda, who he believed to be the HPSC president, along with some heroines, those of which were Mirko, Ryaku, and Miss Joke. The green-haired comedian was clinging to his teacher Aizawa. Upon hearing the door open, the occupants backstage turned and were surprised to see Batman in person. Amongst them, a few squealed like fangirls. "I pray for you young Midoriya fangirls are worse than even All for One," All Might thought to himself. "These are Pixie Bob, Ragdoll, Midnight, and, to Izuku's surprise, Miriko of all people." Izuku was surprised to the point he raised an eyebrow at their reactions, causing the said women to blush and turn away in embarrassment. But before Izuku could unpack that can of worms, some little footsteps were heard, and the Batman felt something collide with his leg. Glancing down, he saw Koda looking up at him in admiration, and a start was visible in his eyes. Smiling a small, gentle smile, Izuku knelt and patted his head. "Hey there, Koda, something tells me you watched the exam." Koda nodded sheepishly. "I did, you were cool." The said boy smiled at what his hero now looked like. Izuku chuckled at that. "Thanks, how do you like my new suit?" With the stars in his eyes shining brightly, Koda cheerfully replied, "It's so cool. And your car is awesome too." "Thank you, I made them all myself," Izuku said before standing up and waving to the other adults in the room in greeting. Present Mike and a few others waved back, but Mandalay walked over and spoke to him. "Hello again, Midoriya. Koda enjoyed seeing your work and thought you were mega cool," as he put it. Blushing, Kota denied it. I didn't say that. I said he was cooler than he was before at camp. The kid blushed and pouted at his aunt. Izuku continued to smile as he responded, well, thank you, Kota, and I'm glad you liked it. But I'm pretty sure we have a debrief to get to, so we shouldn't keep everyone waiting. Kota reluctantly agreed with this, but couldn't stop himself from pouting. Upon seeing the put, Izuku ruffled his hair, making Kota giggle, and his pout was replaced with a genuine smile. Mandalay thanked him quietly for what, in which Izuku replied with a short and quiet, "You're welcome," before joining the others behind the curtain but a little off to the side and out of view of the audience's sight. He greeted the staff and guests who were all too eager to see the Batman up close. Toshinori even teared up, saying Izuku was so cool, but was soon whacked by Gran Torino, who in his own words said it was for being a big baby. Gran Torino smirked and nodded in agreement as All Might grumbled at that. Izuku greeted them all and chatted with everyone until Nezu quieted them down since they were starting. The green-haired teen did notice how the females were acting a bit strange towards him and figured out why when he caught Mirko looking at his rear while licking her lips. He wasn't as dense as people believed, and from recent discoveries with Momo and Kyoka, he could tell that most of the women, sans Rivori girl, the HPSC president, and Miss Joke, had some different form of affection towards him. But he didn't have long to dwell on this discovery as Nezu opened the curtain just enough to show most of them. Izuku was hidden in the shadow of the curtain, unseen by the crowd of students. Of course, Chio said with an eye roll. Nezu looked over the sea of exam participants with pride and cleared his throat into his hand, getting everyone's attention on him. The students became silent and looked up at the principal, waiting for him to speak. In the front rows were the hero students who had changed into civilian clothing, with the rest of the students behind them from the other courses who had done the same. Hello everyone, I must say congratulations on how you all did in the exam. Now, even with the ending as we expected it to go, I must commend you on a job well done. The crowd clapped at this. After a few seconds they quieted down, letting Nezu continue. This exam was judged by myself and the staff with a few guests, and as you can see behind me we have the HPSC president with us, the 5th and 10th ranked heroines, Mir and Miss Shield, along with Gran Torino, a retired UA teacher, and finally the Wild Pussycats. Izuku could hear some murmurs as the applause kicked in, coming from his class. The murmurs were most likely at the fact that the man Izuku was supposed to be training under during the exam for his test was there as a judge. The students nodded with their future selves, as they would be confused. He didn't think too much of it, though, as it would be explained to them soon, and he waited for the clapping to stop, which it eventually did. Nezu smiled. He looked around the crowd. Yes, quite the lineup if I do say so myself. First off, I believe we should give you all the grades we gave you for your efforts in the exam. The principal pressed a button he took out from his podium, and a large screen dropped from the ceiling, revealing a large A. Nezu smiled as the students cheered at how well they did. Although the Chimera did see its hero students a little confused, so Nezu explained, I see that some of you are unsure of this grade, so I'll explain. I didn't hold back on you all for the exam, meaning you were against terrible odds, to begin with, but even more so during the end of the exam. One of the students stood up at this. The student in question was Itsuka Kendo. Sir, why go so hard on us when we're just first years? Because of Midoriya, Shoto said bluntly, as many nodded in agreement with Shoto. Nezu turned Kendo's direction and answered, that's a bit complicated, so I'll give you the first part of the answer. Things are changing since All Might's retirement. Criminal organizations that have bided their time are re-emerging, and it'll be up to you to fight against them. Kendo nodded for this reason, but one of the students, a female from the business course, stood and raised her hand. Nezu pointed to them, allowing her to speak. SSIR, as much as I want to hear more on that, I think everyone here can agree in asking this, but what happened to Batman and who is he? Asked the young woman while pushing up her glasses, this being none other than Yahiko Hanzo, the girl Izuku had an impromptu date with after escaping the hero students and police in the hospital. The principal smiled at the question. The Batman is all right, in fact is here with us right now doing just fine. At that, everyone looked over the stage, and even amongst the crowd, some of them thought Aizawa may have been Batman due to his appearance, but Nezu quickly shut that down. Well, you have to admit that it is a good guess for who the Batman is, Present Mike said with a smirk as Aizawa glared at his friend. He is not in the crowd nor shown on the stage, but I will introduce him. If you would show yourself, Batman, that would be great, said Nezu while turning to the shadowed side of the stage with his ever-present smile. From the side of the curtain, hidden in the darkness, footsteps were heard. They grew louder as the Dark Knight himself emerged from the shadowed part of the stage and walked calmly toward Nezu's side. Chio rolled her eyes as many of the girls squealed and everyone else rolled their eyes at how theatrical Izuku was being. When the Batman stepped up to the principal's side, he stopped and turned to face the crowd. His cowl was still on as he gazed through the crowd, picking through them to find his classmates and friends. He found them easy enough, and he smirked slightly, but the chimera clearing his throat made Izuku glance at him. It's good to see how theatrical you can be without intending it, but I believe it's time for you to unmask yourself and give them all a good look at the man behind the mask, said Nezu, away from Mike and addressing the Batman. Izuku hesitated slightly but nodded in understanding. After all, he didn't have anything to hide and the only reason he was truly hesitant was due to the outburst that was bound to happen from Bakugo, and Izuku wasn't patient enough for his childhood friend's bullshit right now. It's bound to happen, Mina said with a serious nod on her face. But since Nezu asked he'd do it, his hand reached up to his cowl and pulled it back slowly, letting the crowd sit in the sight of every inch of revealed skin as he took his mask off little by little. By the time it was fully off, Izuku heard a gasp from Yahiko. He turned in her direction and smiled before addressing the entire audience. Hello, I'm Izuku Midoriya. Also known as Batman, but one of you knows me as my secret alias for the exam, Bruce Wayne. The crowd, especially his class, was shocked at the reveal, and like he expected, one voice rang out over all the others, Deku. Izuku looked upon his class, specifically Kirishima and Tetsu, who were holding back an infuriated Bakugo from charging any further toward the stage and lashing out at him. You fucking bastard, I'll get you back for that gut punch. Bakugo was also yelling at the image of future Izuku until Aizawa forced him to stop with one of his famous glares. Speaking formally, Izuku pointed out, it was a kidney punch. This caused Bakugo to growl like a dog and try even harder to get out of the grasp of the two hardened users who were holding him back, but they were struggling because of how much they were shaking. The dyed black-haired teen's sweat dropped a little before glancing at Kyoka and Momo, who waved him with warm smiles. Smiling himself, he returned the gesture before Aizawa shouted at the blonde loudmouth of his class. Bakugo, shut up and sit down before I call your mother. The dirty blonde glared at his teacher before he growled one last time in Izuku's direction. The blonde reluctantly returned to his seat, much to Kirishima and Tetsu's relief, the two main bros taking a moment and giving Izuku a thumbs up before also going back to their places. Several people smirked, learning of Bakugo's fear of his mother as he glared at them. Nezu, seeing that the crowd had calmed themselves to the best of their ability, spoke into the microphone. All right, now that the big reveal has been revealed, why don't you all ask questions to our resident vigilante? Immediately, the entirety of the student body raised their hands, some raising both and waving to try and get called on. Each person from the classes blushed at that, and several teachers rolled their eyes. Izuku rolled his eyes playfully and he analyzed the crowd, picking on the one who he believed would ask him an easy question. Yes, Yahiko-chan. The glasses-wearing girl blushed upon hearing the chan suffix, and the students around her looked at the quirkless girl in confusion about their relationship. They wondered why the quirkless girl was addressed in such a way by the now infamous Batman of 1A. The teachers sighed at the treatment of the quirkless population and needed to fix this. Composing herself from all of the attention on herself, Yahiko asked her question to the best of her abilities. Why did you become the Batman? There has to be more than just being asked by Nezu, so why did you become a vigilante of all things for the exam? That's a great question, admitted Izuku, his eyes portraying his contemplation of how to answer. He paused for a brief moment to collect his thoughts and answered the bespectacled girl the best he could. Not many know this, but I was misdiagnosed quirkless when I was 4 years old. Not misdiagnosed, but a good lie for this. Everyone thought who knew about one for all but said nothing. The audience was silent in surprise at the revelation, Izuku's class friends included. but no one was brave enough to interrupt, so they all let Izuku continue speaking. I only awakened my quirk the day of the entrance exams. That was the first time I ever used it, and I've worked extremely hard to be a hero like my idol, All Might. But in doing so, I lost the reason why I originally wanted to be a hero so badly, said Izuku with a thoughtful look as I mentally reminisced over the past. Many reactions spread through the room, from shock and disbelief to genuine curiosity. But once again, they didn't ask their questions until Izuku was finished. It originally occurred to me that I had lost my path back 6 to 7 months ago when we had our class on the quirkless. It irritated me to see how wrong all the answers to the questions were, and I should know the answers since I was quirkless until just a few months before that. A few people frowned at this. He paused once again, this time a sad frown plastered his face. He dipped his head downward a few centimeters. Not very visible to those who were paying attention, and since all attention was on him, everyone noticed. But what hurt most was how everyone blatantly looked down upon the quirkless in my class, saying how they couldn't be heroes and were liabilities, as if other civilians weren't just as much of a liability, quirked or not. All Might couldn't help the sigh that left his lips, remembering his own experiences as a quirkless person. Letting out a long exhale, Izuku looked up to his classmates and smiled sadly. My friends didn't believe a quirkless person was as capable as a quirked person, which hurt more than anything else, since they told me inadvertently that I couldn't be a hero if my quirk never appeared. Now, a determined stare marked his features as the audience listened and watched intently. But more importantly, it infuriated me. It angered me so much I went to Nezu later that day and explained to him my feelings on the matter, the falsified information, and how hurt I was. That's how we came up with a sort of solution, an exam that would help me and show you all the truth. A hand shot up in the silence, that ensuring that Izuku stopped finally and tried to collect himself. Izuku noticed the motion in the crowd, his eyes glancing towards Itsuka Kendo, and he spoke, "Yes, Kendo-san." The class president of 1B stood and asked, "That's a lot to take in, but how did you decide to become the Batman, a vigilante to be precise?" A few people had curious expressions on their faces. Izuku let out a drawn-out sigh. "It's a long story. To simplify the explanation, it comes down to the fact that during our talks for the original concept of the exam, we wanted to answer a question." Looking towards his glowed hand, inspecting it with emotion, he smiled sadly. "That question, whether someone like me could be a hero, if a person with no special power to make them unique could work on the same level as others with quirks." This time the student body couldn't stop themselves and spoke to each other, or towards Izuku and the staff. Their minds were running with the new information like it was a 10K marathon, and they had taken 10 Monster Energy drinks before starting. Several people chuckled at this, and others smiled. It was to be expected from them, as they had been molded in those strong and flashy quirks that ruled above all in today's society. But with a raised hand, Izuku quieted them down, surprising some and compressing most at his opposed authority over everyone. After seeing everyone had their eyes on him, the Dark Knight explained more about his beliefs. "Now I understand what you're all thinking, that this is absurd. However, you have to look at it from the point of view of someone like me, who lived for years being told I couldn't be a hero without a quirk, being belittled every single day. And even when I unlocked my quirk the day of the entrance exam, I still had lingering doubts that I couldn't help but feel. No matter how much I thought I had changed, the feeling never left me." His words struck the strong inside Melissa, Toshinori, and Yahiko's hearts, but most importantly, they hit the blonde bomber Bakugo the most. Those people either looked down or had smiles on their faces, especially Melissa, who showed her that she could become a hero without a quirk. The blonde hero in training had told Izuku he couldn't be a hero his whole life, and even now, he had reservations about the teen he had known since childhood. But the things that hit hardest were the realization of what Izuku had mentioned earlier: if he could be a hero without a quirk, but doesn't that mean, wait, but that couldn't be. The blonde's eyes widened as he understood the real reason Izuku wanted to be in the exam now. He fought the entire exam quirkless, using support equipment to prove he could be a hero without a quirk, and he succeeded. "I was wrong." Bakugo's own eyes widened, finally fully taking in that Izuku did what he said was impossible. Izuku did the whole thing with support gear and his skills without the use of his quirk. Bakugo's face was a mix of conceded defeat and acceptance. He was wrong. The proof was in front of him, and even though he was arrogant, prideful, and everything in between, even he could accept the reality in front of him, and that reality told him that Deku no Izuku Midoriya could be a hero too, despite his claims. "Hey, Bakubro, you good?" asked Kirishima in a worried tone. Kirishima frowned at his friend as he looked at him. Looking towards his one and only true friend Bakugo, contemplating on what to say, he wanted to lash out as per his usual routine, but something stopped him. In the back of his head, a voice that he had always ignored was speaking once again, and for once in his life, Bakugo listened. "No, I'm not all right. But we can talk about it later," the blonde said in a low but audible tone. The worry that Kirishima felt increased a lot. Surprised by his friend's uncharacteristic words, Kirishima could only nod and ponder what had changed in his friend to make him act so differently from before. The interaction between the two didn't go unnoticed by Izuku, his trained eyes at how everyone reacted and their reactions when speaking to one another. Glancing at Kendo, Izuku spoke with confidence. "I hope that answers your question, Miss Kendo." Said girl nodded with a faint blush. "It has, thank you for answering Midoriya-kun." The girls looked at her as she blushed. She, with lingering emotions swirling inside her from what Izuku said, added that the way he looked at her with such confidence made her knees feel weak, and a blush appeared on her face. He had no right to be so damn handsome and charming. With a bite on her nail she contemplated how good he looked in his suit and her blush turned to the same shade as her hair. She didn't notice how a few females in the audience and on stage noticed her reactions, but said the ladies didn't bring it to light, and instead bookmarked it in their minds to address it later. The girls just looked at Kendo more intensely. Izuku sensed that it was time for the next question and said as much. "I believe you all still have questions." Everyone raised their hands at this, causing Izuku to sweat drop, but taking it in stride, pointed out a female he didn't remember the name of. "You, the brunette from Class 1B. The said female stood showing off her shot statue with a phone in hand, taking notes. "Yes, I'm Komori Kanoko. I'm a steamer part-time to help with my hero idol career. I hope to have once I graduate, and I ended up steaming a large amount of your time as the Batman. I was wondering how you survived the explosion. Is it your suit, or was it part of your quirk?" Grimacing at that memory, Izuku explained the entirety of that incident and how he ignored the danger and injuries he sustained to continue pursuing the exam. A few flinched at that memory. A few more questions were asked, and Izuku did his best to answer with the best of his abilities, from how he got into shape to be the Batman, including his workout schedule, which made them pale at his dedication, or what all his gadgets were and how he used them through the exam. The last one was May, the pink-haired engineer, wanting to know the names of his gadgets' babies. She was pretty miffed at the simple name, hacking device, as its name was too bland. Izuku had to relent to it being a poor choice of name after hearing the rest of the student body agreeing with her, and it was after some crowd suggested that their previously known hacking device was renamed the cryptographic sequencer. "Hell yeah, now the baby has a proper name," May yelled out in happiness. "You do have to admit it is a much better name," Aoyama said while looking at the readers in his usual fashion, as everyone looked at him in confusion at what he was looking at. It was a little much in Izuku's opinion, but the rest of the auditorium loved it, leaving Izuku with no choice but to accept the change. But now, at the very end of the Q&A session, Izuku chose another of Class 1B, specifically, he picked the prickly green-haired maiden, Abara Shiozaki. The Christian girl stood from her seat and had her hands clasped together as she spoke her inquiry. "Midoriya-san, you mentioned awakening your quirk at the beginning of the exam. In other words, you lived quirkless for most of your life." Izuku nodded at the statement made to him. "That is correct, Shiozaki-san. How exactly does this connect to your question?" Looking at the man who had undoubtedly suffered severely yet preserved, the young woman spoke with a glimmer of hope that he'd answer the opposite of what she expected him to. "I bring it up because I wanted to ask how bad of an experience you had growing up. I know from having a quirkless boy at the church I volunteer at that it is a life full of numerous hardships." "Unfortunately, it is," All Might said with a frown on his face, and others nodded from having seen it through Izuku's experiences. The solemn expression on Izuku's face told her and the rest that what she expected and hoped against was the unfortunate truth, and Izuku answered as such. "It was, Sigh, I'm sorry to say, but being quirkless in this society is one of it into the worst circumstances one can be born into, whether it be excessive bullying from the age of 4 and getting worse as the years go by, or the fact that people don't see you as less than human. To the point some businesses and establishments will refuse you service. It is not an easy life by any means. Sniffle. Abara cried tears of melancholy as she comprehended his words. She quickly prayed for Izuku's protection and happiness. Her mental prayer towards him would be that he lived a long and happy life with a wife who would love him for the rest of their lives. Mentally, a picture of herself and Izuku appeared, and she couldn't help but feel the unholy feeling of glee from seeing herself pregnant with his child, as he held her softly with her hands showing off wedding bands. This mental image was unknown to everyone, but once again, the girls who liked Izuku noticed, as if it were a sixth sense, that a girl was falling for their crush. Well, it seems you girls are gaining a sixth sense, Snipe said with amusement in his voice. But while the subject was on Izuku's bullying, one of the pro-heroines on stage took the chance to speak about the finer details. Mirko, or Maruko to others, since the saying is the same, had become a big fangirl of Izuku Midoriya. This was to be expected when said man ran around in black tights kicking all kinds of ass while being the type of boy her mom warned her about when she was younger. The pro-hero blushed at that. And apparently, she was still very much interested in those types, and the new Izuku was exactly what she wanted. Dark, tall, and handsome with an intensity to make her wetter and a slip and slide to boot. So when she heard he was bold for bogus bullshit just like her growing up, well, she was pissed the fuck off to a new level to the degree she had never before until now. Hey, handsome, got the names of those bullies who hurt you growing up? I'd like to have a very long chat with them, said Mirko with a feral smirk, showing her intent to do more than talk. But also with an obvious blush mark appearing on her cheeks, she couldn't hide. Izuku turned and looked into her dazzling ruby eyes, her reddened cheeks making her look cuter than she usually was when he saw her on TV. In a moment of confidence, Izuku did something he never would have expected himself to do. I have names, but Nezu called dibs, so you'll have to ask him to help. I don't like the idea of someone as gorgeous as you getting their filthy blood all over your beautiful tanned skin for just little old me. Mariko's face turned bright red at that, and her ears flopped against her head. Fuck. When did you learn to flirt? Said Rumi as her tanned skin turned beet red, her tail wagging furiously behind her, showing how much she liked him, calling her gorgeous. Giving a small smirk, Izuku shrugged. I didn't, just went with my gut. Rumi blushed further, her ears flopping as she turned away from the man before her. He was too damn attractive for his good. Meanwhile, as this was happening, a select few women glared daggers into Rumi as they murmured in their heads, that should be me. The women nodded in agreement at that. Luckily, before said group of women could jump the stage and do something they'd regret. Only slightly, Nezu spoke up, getting everyone to turn to his small figure on the stage. As much as it is amusing to see you flirting with Miss Usagiyama, I do believe we have time for one last question, said the Lord of Blackmail, Tea, and Chaos. Izuku understood where Nezu was coming from. He had been answering questions for a while now and wanted to get autographs from the pro-heroes before they left. Turning to the crowd, Izuku saw that the majority of the crowd was still raising their hands to be called on. He honestly sweat dropped at that. Was he that interesting? So, going with their instincts, Izuku called on the woman who had been on his mind since the exam had ended and her accidental impromptu confession while confronting the Riddler. Momochan, what would you like to ask me? The raven-haired heiress blushed at having his attention and how he referred to her, but composed herself as much as possible and stood before asking what had been on her mind. Momo blushed but smiled at that. Izuku, I am utterly fascinated with her performance as the Batman, but that caused me to wonder. Will you stay the Batman from now on, or go back to your old costumes and hero name? He stays as Batman better, many people muttered, especially the girls. For a brief moment, the crowd of rowdy students sat completely quiet, until ultimately, each one of them turned to look at Izuku, who was in deep thought. It was a good question. What would he do from here on out? Would he go back to being the smiling hero, Deku, or would he take on the mantle as the Batman, fully interested in going the path he had been dreaming of since he was a kid? The pros and cons of both paths were drastic. One would be the path he dreamed of, with the idea of eventually taking up the role his mentor had recently left vacant. But the Batman lingered, the imposing figure virtually handing over his mental self. The Batman was him. He had known this for a while now, since truly discovering himself in the exam. In the mental landscape, his mental interpretation of himself became indulged by the Batman, until only he remained, the true Izuku remained. Mariko smirked at this, as did many happy Batman were staying instead of the cheap knockoff of All Might that Izuku was trying to be. And as frightening as it sounded, Izuku understood that this was the right way forward. The world didn't need another All Might. Slowly, Izuku's eyes glossed over his friends and fellow hero students, a plan already forming. The world required more than All Might could provide. The world needed heroes plural to stand up and take up the good fight. More importantly, the world needed true heroes who fought tooth and nail to keep people safe, and beyond that, they needed to be heroes in more than just saving lives, but their smiles and hearts as well. So with that in mind, Izuku spoke, his personality visually shifting as his statue changed. His shoulders leaned back, his back straightened, while his eyes were harnessed with intensity and pressure that many in the audience only recognized from the experience with the previous #1 hero currently standing on stage. I have been looking for what type of hero I wanted to be before this exam even started, and I've recently found my answer, spoke Izuku, his tone the same way he spoke while playing the role of Batman. Many smiled at this, lifting his cowl and putting it on. Izuku's eyes burrowed their gaze into the crowd as he spoke with absolute conviction. I am the Batman, and I will rise to be a hero who will become a mythical legend. And I won't be alone. I will push my class and Class 1B to rise with me as well. Murmurs started in the crowd, the majority being from classes 1A and B, but they were stopped abruptly as Izuku continued. The word has built itself on All Might in his image, but with him, gone crime has risen. The villains in the dark who were plotting until he retired have finally returned. That is true, the whole of society revolved around All Might being invisible, Nezu said seriously, and most people nodded with a frown. Grimace spread through the audience, the teachers and the HPSC president included. But by now, they were all hooked on his every word. Narrowing his eyes, Izuku's cold glare made a few of the skittish students gulp. Our society clung to him as if he were the only hero worth putting on a pedestal, and in doing so became dependent on him entirely. Clenching his fist, Izuku gritted his teeth. We unknowingly turned All Might into our only lifetime, and with him now gone, we are left with no one to truly take his place. That is, unfortunately true, Momo said with a frown. The audience and heroes, by now, were looking upset, and the words of the HPSC president summed up their frustrations. The woman poked with a glare directed at the young hero. What exactly are you trying to get at, young man? Glancing at the influential woman, Izuku's glare matched her own, but he was somehow colder and more chilling. I'm saying that we need to be better, no more symbol of peace that we can throw the weight of society on as everyone else coats by. Crossing her arms at that statement, the brunette woman raised an eyebrow. And what do you suggest we do? We need a symbol to make the people feel safe, not worry them about random attacks, to trust that there is someone to save them. Izuku stood unflinching under the pressure the woman in front of him had passed on to him with her questions. However, the Dark Knight knew exactly how to answer. You think that simply, a singular pillar of heroism like All Might will make it so we get right back into the situation we are now when the next symbol retires. So instead of thinking inside the box, think outside of it for a moment and try coming to the conclusion I have already come to. The entire auditorium was silent once again. Even the loudest and boisterous of those attending this debriefing were dead silent as they mulled over what Izuku was trying to get at. That's until someone got it. Everyone turned to Denki Kaminari, the electric blonde, looking at Izuku with a shocked look. Bro, you're not thinking what I think you're thinking, right? Asked the child of Pikachu. Why do I feel very insulted that you got it before any of us? Jiro asked with crossed arms as Denki pouted. Izuku turned, and his gaze caused Denki to eep out loud and try and hide behind Shoji. Internally, Izuku rolled his eyes, but he got to the point. What are you referring to, Kaminari? You may just be right on your assumption. Slowly, the blonde peeked out from the Shoji and gulped, his voice quivering as he tried his best to answer while having not only Izuku's gaze on him but the entire auditorium as well. Yua, I was sorta thinking that you may be talking about making multiple heroes to fill the gap All Might left. So kinda like a bunch of symbols of peace, but not just for peace but all sorts of stuff. Very good, Kaminari, Nezu said with a smile as Denki blushed a bit at that. Smiling genuinely nodded in approval, causing not only the students but also the heroes and teachers to be shocked at what Izuku was insinuating. The idea of multiple All Mights patrolling through Japan was just extraordinary, and not completely batshit insane at the same time. Many people snorted at how true that is. But the principal sacked in glee. His favorite student had come to the same conclusion as he had by now and was happy to see him trying to implement it already. I am glad to see I am not the only one to see this answer. I'm proud to see that you and I are on the same page, Midoriya. Another shock went through everyone as they heard this, but the most shocked by Izuku's idea had to be the HPSC present. Mentally, she berated herself for not seeing a clear answer from the start, but also the fact that she and her colleagues had not thought of it sooner before All Might had ultimately retired. Many chuckled or outright laughed like Nezu. Facepalming and grumbling to herself, the influential woman set her eyes on the young man in front of her. The fact that this student thought of something that no one else besides Nezu was frightening and somewhat comforting in a way. This young man had potential, and she knew he'd be great one day. All he would need was some more practical experience, and he'd be in the top 10 in no time. There was no doubt in her mind about that. Aizawa had a suspicious frown on his face. Yet, that one thought brought an idea just as brilliant yet risky as one she had just heard, to solve the problems currently plaguing her. With a few seconds to think, Madam President came to a decision. It may be a risk, but in this business of heroes and villains, risks were where the world was built on. Clearing of her throat caused Izuku to turn toward her with a curious glint in his eyes, and she could feel the room's eyes shift to her. Mr. Midoriya, I would like to offer you a deal. I don't like what she could be thinking, Aizawa said with a frown, and many agreed with him. Smiling at his perceptiveness, the grown woman answered, there is no catch, other than guidelines of continuing to keep good grades and doing things in an appropriate manner during hero work. There are no catches. Are you perhaps interested? Izuku stared intensely, and he stood in tense silence for a solid few seconds, making the woman nervous despite her efforts to hide it. Eventually, Izuku broke his silence and spoke, I can't say, you haven't told me what you're proposing. Madam President's smile turned businesslike as she explained, I'd like you to work as a part-time pro hero until you've graduated, all perks and benefits of being a pro included. But I would like Nezu to supervise your work from a camera built into your suit or something of the like, as he can help you if you require it. Never mind, I completely despise what she is thinking, Aizawa said with a larger frown and a glare on his face. Godsmacked expression filled the room at this ridiculous offer. Some were even jealous, but couldn't complain as Izuku had shown the fact that he could easily work as a pro from his earlier performance. Yet, it also raised some jarring questions, mainly from those who wondered if Izuku was truly up to the task of real hero work. Outside of his friends and the few pro heroes who were supportive of this idea, many didn't think the risk was worth it. One of which was Class 1A's teacher. Aizawa had a stern glare trained on the HPSC president, but with a comforting hand from Emi, calmed down slightly and thought it through. Emi did just that with her hopefully new boyfriend. Sure, his problem child was good, really good in fact, but he still worried about the harsh reality of the outside world and how it could take his life. But ultimately, Aizawa knew he had no real choice in the matter. He could recommend not doing it, but he had no power over Izuku's decision, not the powerful commission president. So he had to bite his tongue and watch to see what his student would choose, hoping he couldn't do what he thought he was about to do. Izuku had been surprised but hid the best he could. He found this offer to be honestly the best option for him. He needed real-life experience, and with the rise of villains, he couldn't help but see himself out there and doing his part. With his eyes looking into the female president, Izuku made his decision, unknowingly changing his and many others' lives by doing so. My, I wonder how things will change, Nezu said with a smile on his face. This is Hero News on Channel 4, I'm Orihime Uraraka, and today's segment is about the viral videos going around the internet. I'm referring to the Dark Knight, also known as the Batman. Are you related? Taisu asked Uraraka. Yeah, she's my big sister, Ochako responded with a smile at her sister. The lightly shaded brunette news anchor spoke while looking into the camera, Her sparkling blue-colored eyes showed pride for her work as she spoke to her viewers. Orihime's channel was an internet favorite as of recently, as her career of looking into stories wherever she saw them and her genuine interest in actual journalism caused many to flock to her channel. Added the fact that she joined with a news outlet let her improve the quality of her stream to the public, which in turn made her gain even more fans. And I have to agree, despite how much I hate reporters, she is one of, if not the only, good reporter that exists, Aizawa said with a small smile on his face, especially the little sister of the woman. This, Batman, is a mystery to us all as no notes or written documents correspond with his existence in the hero records of Japan, but from the limited amount of searching I could do through some of my leads, I can safely say that I have found the truth of this guy in town. A portion of her screen became cut off to show the still image of Batman on a church tower taken during the exam, and underneath the image appeared the words, Ua's newest form of exam. That's right, everyone, this, Batman, character took part in an opposing exam for Ua High School. I couldn't find exactly who this Batman character is, but I did find out that he joined the first year of UA's hero course, who were taking part in an exam for their second semester final. The image shifted to a still image of Batman being blown up, and the headline, Extreme or Practical, was shown to those watching. The exam was not extreme at all, it was perfectly okay, Nezu said seriously, as many, especially the students, gave the principal a blank look. Not extreme my ass, they all shouted in their heads but dared not to say what they were thinking to the rat god himself. Adjusting her half-rimmed glasses, the brunette spoke with a tone of curiosity and a hint of suspicion. Now I have to ask, is this points to the explosion a safe exam for teenagers who are only 15 or 16 years old? Or am I being too paranoid since I happen to have a little sister who took part in this exam while in Class 1A? Her eyes portrayed her bubbling emotions as she spoke. I understand to an extent that practical experience is the best for growth, but, come on, I can't be the only one upset by this, right? Akauko couldn't help the dark blush forming on her face at her sister's concern for her, and several chucked at her misfortune, and she tried and failed to glare at them to get them to stop. Slumping into her computer chair, the news anchor sighed. From a text conversation with my sister, I was able to understand that no one in the exam was seriously hurt, and even with the dangerous situations they were in, everything was under control. Yes, the whole malfunctioning electrical sign over water with students half submerged in it. They were still in a controlled environment, but I digress. The viewers could tell Orihime wasn't too pleased, but she calmed herself and sat back up in her chair. The brown-haired female spoke to her over 500,000 viewers and posed a question that was on her mind. She is one of the most successful reporters. All might admit it as he is one of those 500,000 people that watched her, and he had to admit that she is damn good at her job. I know I may be a little biased because a family member was involved, but I can't help but thank the Batman for stepping in and doing what he could to keep those people safe. But that leaves me with a question that even my sister, who was there, couldn't answer. Who is the Batman? Someone that you don't need to know of as of yet, Nezu said seriously, as many nodded in agreement with the principal. With Izuku standing in front of the screen showing the stream of his female best friend's sister, Izuku hummed to himself. He didn't know Uraraka had a sister, but by the way the shorter brunette was curled into a ball mumbling about how overprotective her sister was, well, he could put the math together and tell that she was embarrassed by her sister's behavior towards her. The said brown-haired teenager was blushing even more to the point where her face was bright red. Speaking of other people around him, the young man glanced around the store area. He made his own and was now keeping his Batman gear for the time being. You better keep those baby muscles, May said with a pout on her face. His analytical eyes scanned over everyone in the open room, from the teachers in a corner speaking about the exam results to the students looking at his car and other assortment of gear. Izuku noted how Maruko sat in his car and smiled like a little girl on Christmas Day, and right next to her in the passenger seat was May, who was cackling loudly as she looked at the interior design and assortment of buttons. The girls nodded, as that is something that they would do. Yes, I get to check out that baby, May shouted out in excitement, and Power Loader didn't know if he should be proud of her for possibly improving it or worried that she would hit a button that may cause the car to blow up. But as he smiled at how happy they all were, his eyes went towards the girl standing at his side. I expected you to come to me after we returned to the dorms for our talk, unless I am mistaken, that is. The raven-haired girl blushed and nodded. I was, and still am to a degree. But, while we are here, I decided it is best to get your feedback on a few things I wish to talk to you about. A small yet confident grin formed on Izuku's lips as he asked, "This doesn't have anything to do with your accidental confession of your feelings for me while answering the Riddler's riddles by chance, does it?" Momo blushed at this, as Mineta grumbled at this. Blushing at his claim and turning away in embarrassment, Izuku knew he had hit the nail on the head with that question, and Momo's next words proved this further. Yes, but I would like it if you didn't tease me so," said the heiress while swiping the stray strand of hair in front of her face and tucking it behind her ear. "That is so hot," was one of the many thoughts going through Mineta's mind. Thought Momo's senses went off and bashed Mineta with her bowstaff. The motion was very alluring and elegant, just like the woman who did it. But Izuku knew better than to make light of his strong attraction towards her simple movements right now. So instead, he nodded and apologized. "Sorry, I thought it would be nice to make you blush. And, I have to say you're even more alluring when your cheeks are painted red." Blushing to the point she matched her costume in color, the heiress swatted his shoulder, his armor taking the hit easily while Momo's red and embarrassed squeak made it clear she forgot he was wearing it and swatted him too hard, and had hurt her palm. The said raven-haired teen blushed even more at this. Going with the flow of the moment, Izuku grabbed her hand and held it in front of him as he gently pressed his lips to the injured area, making Momo squeak again. Chuckling to himself at her adorable reactions, Izuku apologized once again. "My apologies, Momochan, I didn't mean for you to get so riled up." Extremely embarrassed at her actions, Momo nodded shyly. "No, I am the one at fault. Next time I will do my best not to react as rashly." Quirking an eyebrow, Izuku asked with a flirty tone, "Next time?" Every girl who was interested in Izuku was giving Momo jealous and envious glares, truly wishing it were this in that situation. Blushing and turning not to look him in the eye, Momo grabbed the area over her heart and crinkled her shirt to suppress a girlish scream from escaping her mouth. Izuku must have known what he was doing to her. It was impossible not to, as his words were bold and crafty for him not to see their physical and mental effect on her. "It's impossible not to," Mina said with a smirk on her face. Calming herself down after a few deep breaths, Momo looked at him and did her best to keep her eyes staring into his own. She said, "Yes, I am hoping I could perhaps become your girlfriend. And, as much as a shock this must seem, I'd like it if Kyoka joins me in this endeavor. We have spoken about sharing you amongst ourselves and have agreed on such action, that is, only if you are all right with it." Mineta was on the ground, crying his eyes out as everyone was doing their best not to. "Why can't I have my harem and achieve the only true goal in life?" Mineta screamed in his thoughts. Her anxious tone made Izuku gaze at her with glee at how adorable she was. In his eyes, she was one of, if not the most, adorable woman he had ever met, due to her shy nature at times that you wouldn't expect from someone as beautiful and graceful as herself. But that wasn't all he loved about her. There was the way she held herself and the way she would mother their friends around as if she were their parents, causing her to be nicknamed Mom of the class. Everyone in 1A nodded at that. "Yeah, she pretty much is the mother of Class 1A, Shoto admitted with a smile on his face as other members of the class put in their agreement to this as she smiled at her classmates. Those were just some of the numerous things that made Momo special to Izuku, but he couldn't think of all those things right now. He had a question to ponder and answer. Taking a moment to think, Izuku thought of the various pros and cons of this rather peculiar inquiry. The idea of multiple lovers was strange but not uncommon in this day and age of quirks. Some part of society was well known for having multiple lovers. The animal kingdom of quirks was very vast and varied in its nature, but the fact that some people were affected mentally by their quirks caused their relationship conceptions to be skewed. Studies and research papers have been done and published worldwide to the point that harems and polyamory were common practices in many countries and have become completely legal. "Which is the only thing I should be having?" Mineta screamed out before he was kicked by Miriko and Ryuko, slapped by Taisu and Kendo, and punched by every other girl in the room, which hopefully knocked him out for a while. Some bold couples in the past few decades have been public about their status despite not being those with animal quirks. Instead, they chose to be part of harems, polyamorous relationships on their own. But all this made Izuku think to himself, should he accept Momo's proposal and be a part of something like this? The answer he came to was obvious, as he had come to love both girls and could easily see himself with both of them. And that's not counting the other girls he had feelings for, or how he had recently bloomed a crush on certain girls and women he had met. Many girls smiled, thinking of the possibility of being with Izuku. It was not for desire but the way he saw love in general. Love to Izuku was a blessing, as he never thought he would ever experience it for himself after living as quirkless for the majority of his life. So with the opportunity presented to him, the choice was an easy one to make. Turning to the expecting heiress, he gave his answer. I would love to be your boyfriend, Momochan, and if Kyoka is willing, I'd love to have her by my side as well. Yes, 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 I got him, Momo screamed in her head. Momo beamed at him as she nodded excitedly. Excellent. I'll go tell Kyoka the good news. The heiress ran off towards the group towards the punk girl from where Izuku stood. He watched as she animatedly explained to an increasingly turning red Kyoka. The said girls also slowly turned red at this, but smiled. Izuku smiled when Kyoka looked over towards him, and she turned away with a bright blush, but despite her embarrassment, the rocker chick raised a thumb in approval of the idea. The black-haired teen looked on at her lovely face, causing Kyoka to blush deeper and turn away, making Izuku amused at her reactions. Deciding to let the two girls get each other about their newfound relationship, Izuku turned his attention to the Batcomputer. His heavy yet quietly trained steps echoed as he approached the device that had helped him through the exam, the screens turning on as he pressed the on button. An emblem of a bat was shown on the screens until he started to type in his password. Entering his desktop a second later, Izuku started to type into the programs he had installed and developed himself. I wonder what he is going to do now, Nezu said with a sparkle in his eyes, as many decided further distance from the rat god would be a good idea. As Izuku worked, a voice came from his side. Izuku recognized it as the principal of Uenezu, the rat god himself. Midoriya, I see you are booting up the aptly named Batcomputer. May I ask what it is you are doing currently? Izuku, without skipping a beat, responded without taking his eyes off the screen, and his fingers continued to tap rapidly. You already know what I am doing, sir, and even if you didn't know that, you have already figured it out the second you looked at the screens. Nezu culled manically. Oh indeed I do, but to those behind me, I believe they need an explanation. Of course, many pros sighed out. Pausing in his work, Izuku turned to glance at whom he was referring to. And to his surprise, Izuku saw that everyone had surrounded him to see what he was doing. Some, like Mei and Melissa, were still figuring out what he was doing, but the more seasoned, technologically savvy of the bunch, like Mr. Shield and Power Leader, had figured it out and were staring at him in surprise. Wait, is he? Both Power Loader and David Shield thought in shock. Izuku nodded to the Chimera before explaining as he got back to typing, I am connecting my computer to the police database of Japan, the Hero Public Safety Commission's public and secret servers, and am implementing some firewalls to stop anyone from hacking into them so easily. Like you just did? Asked the HPSC president, who was rubbing her temples in annoyance at how easy Izuku was making it look to get past her secure servers. Several people couldn't hold their amusement and burst out laughing, especially Aizawa, at this, as they just found Izuku hacking into the HPSC in seconds beyond hilarious. Exactly, replied Izuku without much thought. While the adults turned to each other and talked about this new development, the teens around Izuku got at his attitude, and one, Mina Ishido, expressed this surprise the best. Damn, didn't know Midobabe was such a rebel, it's kinda hot, the pink-skinned girl said while murmuring the last part. Preach it, future me, Mina said with a blush which is purple due to her pink skin. Toru, Setsuan, and Reiko from Class 1B nodded to the pink girl's words, while the other girls and women blushed but didn't deny the claim. And from he guys around who heard Mina, they nodded along while two distinct manlies could be heard from Kirishima and Tetsu. Kirishima nodded at that as it was manly, as many were amused by the two hardened users' antics. But it was after a few minutes that Izuku finished typing, having finished his work on raising firewalls made them 3 times harder to hack into, and adding a little surprise to anyone who tried to get into them while he was at it. Izuku then, to test his newfound abundance of knowledge, asked his AI a question. Speaking aloud, he asked, "Alfred, bring up the case of crimes that haven't been solved, but filter them through recent, in alleys, and if it is presumed that a member of the League of Villains was involved or responsible." "Ooh, we get more of his AI," Melissa said with excitement. Before anyone could ask who Izuku was talking to, the brightest accented voice of Alfred came from the computer speakers and the speakers around the room. "Yes, sir, it will only take a moment." "WWA's that a ghost?" asked Kaminari, his head on a swivel. Many shook their heads or sighed at the stupidity of their classmate, but didn't respond to the electric user of Class 1A. Kyoka and many others sighed at the question, but it was the AI that ended up answering the blonde's inquiry. "I am not a ghost, Mr. Kaminari. I am an artificial intelligence created by my creator, Izuku Midoriya." "Oh, okay, what's an artificial whatever it was?" asked Kaminari. Melissa and May face faulted as David and Power Loader gave him a blank look. How does he not know what one of the most basic things in technology is? They screamed in their heads. "When we get back, I am shoving the last 400 years of technology down your head so you will understand," May said with a blank look on her face. At this, Melissa stepped forward and explained, "An AI or artificial intelligence is a very advanced program which can think for itself to an extent and do a multitude of things based on request or pre-programmed action given to the AI." "So, a computer ghost, that's your homie?" Melissa, who looked utterly baffled by Kaminari, turned to Izuku, who shrugged in response to the unasked question she was giving him with her stare. All of the techie people in the room got a massively twitching eye. But thankfully, before the child of Pikachu would ask any more questions, Alfred chimed in, getting everyone's attention. "Sir, I have come across a few cases, but I believe this one is the most likely to be connected to the League." The case file appeared on the main screen, causing Izuku to open it and start looking through it, from the written reports to the photos taken at each crime scene. From what Izuku read, the police thought that these murders were connected since each victim found in an alley had puncture marks to the neck, and every victim was fully drained of blood. Toga, everyone thought to themselves. All this made the police believe that the perpetrator was none other than Himiko Toga, the shapeshifting blood drinker of the League of Villains. But there was one problem with the conclusion. "The bite marks don't match up," mumbled Izuku to himself, but was just loud enough to be heard by the others. Everyone was confused about what he meant. Aizawa, who was in the back of the group just watching his student work, couldn't help but wonder aloud. "What do you mean, problem child?" Izuku didn't answer. Instead, he opened the HPSC servers and searched for medical records of Himiko Toga and found what he was looking for. Dental records of Toga just before she left home 2 years ago, and what he expected to find was glaringly obvious. Toga has 12.7 centimeters between her top canine teeth, meanwhile the puncture marks of each victim are exactly 20 centimeters apart. "It doesn't fit her mouth structure," Aizawa said in realization. "Must be someone new, though it sucks that she is immediately blamed, especially since they didn't measure the bite marks on the victims," David said with a small frown on his face. At this, Aizawa froze, narrowed his eyes, and rubbed his stubbled chin. "The bite marks don't fit her mouth structure, so it can't be hers. Is that what you're trying to say?" Izuku nodded to his teacher before turning back to the computer. "Exactly, we have an unknown serial killer out on the loose, and the police have been suspecting the wrong person for the last 2 weeks since the murders started. So if that's true, then the killer would have started around now." Present Mike said with a frown on his usually upbeat face, as many nodded at this. Many grimaced at this, but none more than the HPSC president. In not even 10 minutes, Izuku had completely turned a case upside down, and it only took a moment for him to notice something as small as the bite marks not being the right size. She was honestly conflicted on whether or not she should be impressed or disappointed at the moment, impressed at Izuku's detective prowess, to disappointed in her men and those of the police who were on the case. Nezu and Aizawa smirked at this. But instead, she chose a different path. "Midoriya, I would like to ask of you if it is not much, to take up this particular case AF the first of your hero career. Standing slightly, Izuku thought it over for a brief moment. He didn't see anything wrong with what he was being asked to do, and from what data he currently had on file, he could find this killer in a week more or less if everything went his way. That would be very good, Aizawa said with a nod, and he was hoping that this case would only take that long. I don't see why not. Give me some time to check the victim's background and see if I can find a connection between them, and I'll see what I can come up with. The HPSC president smiled and nodded. Of course, now I must go. I have overstayed my welcome and need to get back to the office, or the big heads of the council may do something stupid. Before she walked away, the light brown woman turned back to Izuku and spoke one last time. I look forward to your prospects, I'll be watching your career closely. Izuku understood what she was saying, and the way she purposefully worded it. She was giving a warning to stay in line, like the people of the HPSC usually did. And this is one of the many reasons I don't like the government, Aizawa said with a deep frown on his face. The government organization, for all its past and current good, was nothing more than a fearmonger that ruled with absolute authority over everything else. But Izuku could play this game if that's what she wanted. After all, he was far too smart and determined to let someone boss him around without his consent. And I look forward to the future as well, hopefully nothing bad happens. Like a little bird getting free of his cage, or a past coworker coming to talk about the real reason why they let go of the company. Oh, I wonder what he is talking about, Nezu said as he would love dirt on the HPSC. The visible flinch that came from the HPSC president was jarring, but even more disturbing was the gulp and turning away she did before leaving without another word being spoken. Izuku watched till she fully left before turning to Nezu, who was smiling like a loon. I'll speak with you about what we should do about the Hero Public Safety Commission's future, but for now, I'll send you all of their dirty deeds and let you brew up ideas on your own. Nezu's smile turned devilish as he rubbed his paws together. Midoriya, on this day, you have without a doubt become my favorite student to ever teach. If you ever need anything, just give me a call and I'll do whatever it is you desire. Everyone slowly looked towards Nezu, who was oddly silent. But slowly a manic smile crossed the rat god's face that sent shivers down everyone's spines. What have you started, Midoriya, Deku, Izuku, young Midoriya? Everyone thought in fear. My Hero Academia is now fucked for one. Smirking Izuku gave the principal a mischievous look. I'll make sure to take you on that offer, but for now, I believe it's time to rest. This case can wait until tomorrow after I am fully rested, and I'll go on my first patrol tomorrow evening. Everyone around the two was dead silent at what they had seen and heard. First receives a veiled threat from the HPSC president, the next moment, Izuku threatens her back to the point she recoils, and now Nezu promises to do whatever Izuku asks of him. Well, we're fucked harder than me in the fantasies I have of big, cute and dreamy, said Setsuin while gesturing to Izuku, the spitting girl speaking in her usual crude but often factually correct fashion. All the girls blushed darkly at this. Setsuna cried out, Abara, from the green-haired girl's side. Said girl just shrugged while looking at her friend and classmate. What? Everything I said was true. That's even worse, yelled Abara, rolling her eyes and crossing her arms. Setsuna retired. Whatever, I still think we're fucked through. She's not wrong, Iida muttered in fear as everyone nodded, too afraid to say anything. Even as Abara chastised her friend, everyone else couldn't help but agree that the future was seeming more and more chaotic as time went on, and they couldn't help but wonder what Izuku would ask of Nezu in the future. Heights Alliance 1A Dormitory. It had been about an hour since Izuku and the others had left the storage area where Izuku kept his Batman gear, and since then, he and the students of Class 1A had celebrated the end of the exam with a feast of food. Mainly pizza bought by their dorm's resident mother, also known as Momo, who was gracious enough to buy it all for them, and other than that, Sato made some pastries to go with the delicious pizza they had eaten. Many members of Class 1A nodded at this, as a few pro-heroes nodded. But this was a few hours since then. Now in Izuku's room, the black-haired teen looked around at the occupants currently standing, or sitting around him in the cramped space. So, I take it Mu and Kyoka weren't the only girls who had feelings for me since you all are here. asked Izuku, getting straight to the point. The women around Izuku reacted in various ways to being called out like this, the most surprising to Izuku being Miriko and Midnight. Several girls were crying at this, as Mineta was in a corner, crying to himself about how unfair life is. Mainly because Miriko was acting shy and timid with her ears plopped down, and Midnight was in the same boat, if not even more shy, to the point she hid behind Ryaku. And even then, there's the more bold of the bunch. Setsuna was giving him fuck me eyes along with, to his surprise, Tsuyu. The girls blushed deeply at this. The room was blanketed in silence until someone decided they had had enough and spoke from their heart. Mei Hatsume, the support maniac of Class 1H, started to speak, getting everyone's attention. Why is everyone so quiet? We all wanna fuck muscles, right? Isn't that the point we all came here for? Izuku raised an eyebrow at this, but couldn't help but notice that the girls weren't denying the claim, just refusing to look at him in the eye, besides a select few. Many girls blushed deeply, and several heroes felt amused by this. Is this true? Inquired Izuku, causing the girls to shrink in on themselves before agreeing with head nods, small confirmations, and from the bold straight-up proclamations of wanting to date fuck him. And at this, Izuku nodded to himself. Well, I can't say I know all of you enough to say I truly love each of you to the degree you are hoping for. At this, the girls looked down and were upset. However, Izuku wasn't done. But, and this is a big but, I'm not exactly against the idea, and I'm honestly interested in dating all of you, even if that's my touch-starved mentality acting up, and getting to know you all better than I already do sounds nice. But after saying this, Izuku became serious. But with that said, I can't promise that this idea will work perfectly in the end, and we all get a happily ever after. I've lived through too much to be gullible enough to think everything is going to go off without a hitch. For a moment, the girls glanced at each other, a silent conversation happening between them all. And it was Kendo who stepped forward and answered. At least he is giving this a chance, the girls thought with a small smile on their faces. I say this for everyone here, we understand there will be trials to this relationship. And each one of us is willing to fight for this if you're willing to have us. Eyes widening at that, Izuku blinked a few times before responding with a gentle smile. That is acceptable, I hope to live up to your expectations of me. Eyes looked at him with hope, longing, and endearment. Immediately, Izuku was tackled into a hug-turned pile of limbs. The feeling of various womanly body parts covering him was an odd sensation, but not an unwelcome one, with the amount of touch-starved Izuku was after many years of neglect for being quirkless. Why him, not me? Mineta cried out as they tried to ignore him. Okay, I may be used to some small amounts of female interactions by now. But this is a bit much for May. Don't grab there. Oops, sorry not sorry muscles, said the support gear marker, but with no evidence of any remorse for her action. The girls blushed deeply at what May did as the girl shrugged without care. Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine as the girls looked up at him with an expression he had never seen on a woman before. Gulping to himself, Izuku spoke nervously. Now girls, I know you're all happy about this, but why are you all undressing? Momo, why did you lock the door, and why is Kyoka closing the door and window curtains? Oh my all might, may you survive Midoriya. Deku, problem child, was the thought of the teachers and his male classmates. Before Izuku was a sight most men could only dream of, there stood in various sets of lingerie and common undergarments were Izuku's newest girlfriends. And they sure didn't look like they wanted to play games, or any games Izuku was familiar with. Gulp, why can't it be me? Why oh god why are you so cruel, as Miriko kicked him into a wall. Gee girls, this should wait until we progress the relationship and are fully ready to go further with our commitment to each other. Exclaimed the Dark Knight, for the first time in a while, feeling actual fear. At this, Momo stepped forward, her lacy black lingerie contrasting with her pale flesh. Izu, honey, you've gotten to know us for a year by now, some more than others, in Miriko and Ryaku's cases. But in that time, we each fell for you, well, most of us fell for you like that. As I've said, Miriko and Ryaku are special cases. Turning his gaze towards the two mentioned ladies, Rumi blushed deeper in her chocolate skin, looking vexed in the white set of panties and bra. Mineta didn't even try to hide as he was perving on the girls' bodies as the girls pounced on him and started to beat him into unconsciousness. While Ryuko looked at him analytically, before her forked tongue slid out of her mouth and glistened her lips in a show of undisputed interest. You know what, forget it. At this point I should just go with the flow with the bullshit happening of late. Exhaled Izuku with a deep sigh. Probably a good idea, the men thought to themselves. Ochako patted his head in comfort, but made sure to lift her pinky to not make him float, causing him to look up at her with tired eyes. Izuku noted the mismatched clothes set of undergarments she was wearing, and thought they looked cute on her. The brown-haired teen blushed but smiled. But before he or the other girls could act, the shy voice of Yahiko came from the side. Her large breasts and tight on full display as she spoke in her timid voice. Gee girls, isn't it better to do this somewhere better? With a bigger bed and some soundproofing on the walls, if possible. Everyone stared at the glasses-wearing girl before immediately coming to a realization and agreeing. Everyone quickly got their clothes on again before Momo led them out of the dorm and to the front of the dorms. While getting dressed, the raven-haired girl had called for her driver and texted Aizawa that she and the others were leaving the campus, with the only reply she got in return being a thumbs-up emoji. Aizawa shrugged. As long as he and others don't have to hear it, he doesn't care. Time skip. Next day. When morning came and the students of Class 1A started eating breakfast, they quickly noted that something wasn't right. And it wasn't until Kirishima pointed it out did they fully notice what was odd this morning. My fellow bros and dudes, where are the girls and Izubro? Having a very eventful night, Denki said with a small chuckle as most of the men nodded in agreement. Quote. Silence was the only response to this until, and worriedly, each of them started to worry about what had happened to them, like good friends they were. However, it was as Katsuki sighed and pulled a worried, sick Kirishima, who looked like a worried mother, back down to his chair, that the doors of the dorms were kicked open. They all shot their gazes to the door to see a haggard-looking Izuku fumble his way into the dorms, sweat slicking his skin, and completely out of breath was a slight limp in his step. Strangely enough, with the eye bags, still dyed black shaggy hair, Izuku looked exactly like what you'd expect a younger Aizawa to look like. Well, he didn't get any sleep, Shiro said with a smirk as the girls blushed deeply. Quote. What the hell happened to you, Deku? Asked the blonde bomber with actual curiosity and no signs of aggression. Looking up at Bakugo in confusion for a moment, Izuku took a second to reply, Woman, lots and lots of women did this to me. Denki and Mineta felt jealous, but Denki was smart enough not to say anything. Why can't it be me? The pervert of Class 1A yelled out as Ryuko threw him into the ceiling. Izuku walked past them and entered the kitchen, where an assortment of food was. He guzzled down protein bars and a large jug of water as if they were nothing. And once he was alone, the raven-haired teen walked to the elevator and took it to his floor, where he promptly took a shower and took some aspirin for his bruised flesh. Time skip. The impromptu Batcave setup was up and operating, with only a few snags that needed to be fixed. For instance, the location wasn't ideal anymore, but it was now manageable to drive out of in the Batmobile since Smentos made a road for him that led to the front gate. So cool, many yelled out as Cementos smiled at this. Other than that, Izuku just needed to move where things were in the base so that it wasn't as crammed as before, which he found out when trying to get ready for his patrol later that day. All that being said, the last problem Izuku was experiencing wasn't one he could honestly fix on his own. The problem in question was the two residents who had come to the base to work on an assortment of his gadgets and gear, and to add to this, the two had been there way before he arrived. May, if you're finished with the cryptographic sequencer upgrades, I need help with the blueprints of the next Batmobile design and upgrades to the current model. Yelled Melissa Shield to her partner in crime while scribbling. And said partner only cackled evilly while finishing the soldering on the gadget on her table, of course. My babies shall be magnificent. Yes, May and Melissa yelled out in excitement as David smiled at his daughter. Izuku, in his undersuit layer of the batsuit, sweat dropped at this. Shouldn't you two be with Recovery Girl and the others? With his arms crossed, Izuku looked at the two girls in matching wheelchairs that he knew were from Recovery Girl's office. They were two of the many victims of Izuku's seemingly endless stamina. The majority of the girls had needed to rest or recovery girls healing after they were done, and yet here these two were, nearly looking at him without concern before shrugging in response. All the girls blushed deeply at this. May responded to him with an excited tone. There is a time for healing and a time for inventing. This is a time for innovation as the ideas is pouring into my cranium like you sperm into my fertilized womb. What May is trying to say is that we have so many ideas and wish to work on them as soon as possible, and hopefully get your input if you are available. Many nodded, but most of the people in the theater gave May a blank look on their faces. Melissa was blushing deeply but kept her composure, even with the two of them in wheelchairs due to their activities earlier that night. The blonde thought she and May could at least be professional when it came to their work. And truly, Izuku didn't entirely mind this. Rather, the fact was that he was worried about them using themselves too far, which he was begrudgingly guilty of doing. But seeing the determined eyes May and Melissa sported, Izuku knew he couldn't say no to them. Okay, as long as you two respect your bodies and take breaks when needed, I'll let you two continue. Even if I can't exactly force you out, I will, however, be very disappointed in you if you do hurt yourselves. Recovery girl couldn't help but nod at this, not liking that they were working even though they were injured, in a way. May cheered in triumph, ignoring the last part, while Melissa smiled happily but also gulped at the thought of him being disappointed in them. It was spread to the other girls that Izuku pulled the protective boyfriend card for the first time. Isn't that a little hypocritical since you run head first into danger constantly? Asked Melissa with a tilt of her head. Izuku's answer was just as nonchalant. Extremely, but I couldn't care less about that since I care more for you two than to let sound logical arguments sway my worries for both of you. The girls smiled at this. Melissa was just about to point out how that didn't make any sense when her father and Powerloader barged into the temporary base, the support teacher carrying multiple rolls of engineering paper and blueprint paper. Yo. Good to see we weren't the only ones to want to get straight to work in the new gear and current gear. I'll put these down and we can talk shop, exclaimed Powerloader. Mr. Shield, who had a giant rolling container of various tools that weren't currently in the base, rolled the tools to the side before stating his greeting to the others. Good afternoon, everyone. Mima and I were brainstorming ideas all morning and thought it best to get your thoughts on them, but it seems you've started without us. David and Powerloader had a smile that split open their faces, and they could work on this. But it was here that the older Shield noticed something. Looking at his daughter and May, he quickly noted the wheelchairs they were both in. I'm gonna ignore that for my sanity. Good idea, future me, David said as he looked at his daughter as she shifted in her seat. Melissa blushed with a pale face, and nodded approvingly to the idea. She didn't want to explain to her father why she was in such a state after telling him she would stay with Izuku the night before. Izuku sighed upon seeing the situation start to get out of hand after the awkward moment, and he didn't even get to speak a word as Mr. Shield quickly looked over the work May did on the cryptographic sequencer and gave criticism. Meanwhile, Hajime, aka Powerloader, looked at the new design of the next model to the Batmobile and did the same as his longtime friend. The said inventor smiled at being able to work on the next Batmobile. Shaking his head, Izuku stepped forward and joined the conversations going on, letting his mind wander to the new ideas as they all started giving creative criticism and joint ideas to Izuku's gear or entirely new equipment he could eventually use. The most interesting thing to Izuku was the training room, which had robot opponents to simulate combat and help Izuku train in various scenarios. Amazing, we should use this for future training, Aizawa said as the situations they could make are nearly endless, so that the students are as prepared as possible. Which, after a long discussion, switched from robots to an AI hologram system designed to simulate actual combat by having haptic feedback through a suit specifically made for the training system. Punches and kicks would weigh them through a combination of components. He would feel resistance when hitting a virtual opponent as well, and the feeling of pain from being hit could be copied with small pinpoint vibrations. The other idea, besides the virtual training system, would be the new suits each of the inventors came up with, based on a more basic design like the prototype suit used in the second part of the exam that Hajime came up with. To the more armored mecha-type suit May came up with that had folding wings that worked like Izuku's full gauntlet from Island in that they could spring out of a small portion of material to reach their full size from a respectably small slice of technology. That baby is amazing, May said with a smile at the mech her future self made. Izuku didn't have any objections to the suits and was curious about the one Melissa and Mr. Shield were going to collaborate on together. He liked that the inventors each wanted to test themselves by making suits for him individually, and had diversity in what each one would excel at. But to help speed this process along, the black-haired teen brought up his notes, from the schematics of the two suits he had in the exam, to the gel-like armor of the prototype suit, the shape-modulated cape, assorted gadgets, and lastly, his detective vision. They were fascinated by the notes and scribbled onto their blueprint sheets, and took notes of what they would use or adjust to their liking. After that was a blur, Izuku helped where he could and learned from each of the geniuses he was working with. His self-taught skills were slowly being polished further by the more experienced people around him. Eventually, however, noon turned to evening. The sun started to set, and the shadows lengthened by the sun's final glare of the day dwindled. By 6:20 a.m., it was time for Izuku to go out and patrol for the first time in the real world, not a simulation or an internship, but the real deal. Many smiled and couldn't help but feel curious about how it would go. With the adjustments to the Batmobile being recently finished and the final tests making sure it was working perfectly, Izuku donned his suit and cowl. Getting praises from the girls who filmed him on their phones, Izuku gave a small smirk their way before suiting up fully and supplying his utility belt with his equipment. But right as Izuku opened the door to the Batmobile and stepped inside, the engine roared to life as flames shot from the black burner. The curious voice of Mr. Shield rang out, getting Izuku's and the others' attention. Looking out the window and towards the older man, Izuku asked, "Sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat it?" David rolled his eyes playfully before repeating what he had asked the first time. "You do have a license and have this thing registered, right?"
"Yeah, that's a good question," Iida said mostly to himself. Izuku nodded. "I had Nezu help me register it, and I have long since gotten my license a few months ago. So there's no reason to worry, Mr. Shield." "Of course he did," David muttered to himself. With a smile, David nodded approval. "Okay, just wanted to make sure it's all. And Izuku, just call me David or Dave. You're dating my daughter now, and I'm in full support of it, so calling me by my name is the least you can do is say my given name instead." Surprised by this, Izuku stayed silent for a moment before untimely replying, "Will do. Dave." David smiled, and his daughter smiled too, as did All Might. The Batmobile shot out of the open garage door of the base, the sleek muscle car traveling towards the gate at incredible speeds. Passing by students on its road, much to their surprise. David looked at the retreat form of the vehicle and smiled at the sight along with Melissa, Mei, and Hajime. That was until Nezu spoke, surprising and scaring the four right out of their socks. "Ah, what a sight. My favorite student riding off on the next step of his journey in heroism. I can't wait to see what Midoriya's future has in store. When the hell did he get there?" Many thought to themselves. Turning around and staring at the principal after getting somewhat over their shock, the four inventors wondered to themselves, when the heck did he get there? Nezu noticed the surprise written on their faces, and couldn't help but to comment, "I take it none of you besides Izuku noticed that I arrived about midway through Miss Hatun's explanation of making a secret underground base for Izuku to do his hero work in." All three inventors shook their heads negatively, causing Nezu to cackle, unnerving the four even more. "Ah, how amusing. But let's move on. I have a patrol to watch, and thankfully, Izuku is letting me do so by looking through his custom contract lenses used for his detective vision." Nezu smiled widely at this. Staring at the principal, none of the inventors moved upon hearing his words. But then, like lightning, they all scrambled towards the Batcomputer, each of them eager to continue watching Izuku work. Nezu chucked quietly to himself as he watched them go. "How amusing. I should probably ask Alfred to keep video records of Izuku's patrols to use in lessons. It would lighten up the dreary classroom environment regarding indoor lectures." The while friend Chimera joined the genius gadgeteers with a smile, and looked forward to seeing his student work in the real world without safety nets or restrictions like the ones in the exam. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Now we will see you in the next video.